What would happen if the most powerful religious institution on earth protected not only the faith, but also secrets, buried tombs, missing artifacts, UFOs, and a missing girl? Welcome to the Vatican. 44 hectares of sacred tradition built upon 2,000 years of unsolved mysteries. Some hidden in plain sight, others sealed behind walls that no outsider has ever crossed. Tonight, we will not just open the archives. We're going to reveal everything they don't let you see. These are the most unresolvable mysteries of the Vatican in history, and it starts now. Before opening the vault, take a moment to hit the subscribe button. This is where history conceals its wildest secrets. And since we were talking about time zones and sacred clocks, where are you watching from? Write your city and the time on screen in the comments below. Let's see how far this mystery goes. The true contents of the secret archives of the Vatican. The secret archives of the Vatican. Just saying it aloud feels like an intrusion. An extensive underground labyrinth under the heart of Rome, full of shelves that extend more than 50 m, wrapped in an absolute silence where even a hum is heard. Behind its fortified walls, under centuries of dust and divine authority, lie whispers of empires, saints, traitors, prophets, and popes. Each piece of parchment is a loaded weapon. Each locked confessional of the Cabanita keeps history's sins. Officially renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archive in 2019 to soften its mystical air, this library remains anything but apostolic in the usual sense. It is not a place for public access. You cannot enter to search information about early Christianity. There are no guided tours, no photographs allowed, and of course, nothing can be browsed. Only a select group of academics are allowed to enter, each of whom can request a few specific documents. Even then, what they're allowed to read is filtered, censored, and hidden behind a bureaucracy so Byzantine that it might as well be another sacrament. But what is in there exactly? That is the question. The Vatican doesn't say, and that is the problem. Officially, the archive contains everything from papal account books to diplomatic letters, state secrets, doctrinal drafts, trial records, and papal bulls dating to the 8th century. That is more than 12 centuries of history recorded by the most enduring religious institution on earth. But official does not equal complete. And in this case, it definitely isn't revealed. There are rooms that no scholar has ever entered. There are sections that remain permanently prohibited. There are documents so old and fragile that they could disintegrate in light. And then there are persistent rumors, whispered like sacred relics, about what could be buried in the dark, like a letter from Pontius Pilate detailing the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, or transcripts of Galileo's trial that never saw daylight, or even stranger things, apocalyptic visions, heretical gospels, lost books of the Bible, and reports of unexplained celestial phenomena. One story says that a medieval text is kept in the archives that describes an entity found during an exorcism that spoke of the universe before time and named stars that would not be discovered by science until 600 years later. Another rumor claims that a plan is hidden among the shelves, not metaphorical, but literal, of a device that allows its user to see moments from the past. The infamous chronovisor. We'll get to that. For now, let's keep our feet on the ground, at least as much as you can in a building that houses secrets so powerful they could rewrite religious history. Let's begin with logistics. It is estimated that the Vatican Apostolic Archives contain more than 85,000 volumes and over 35,000 archival pieces. If placed end to end, the shelf alone would extend further than the entire island of Manhattan. These records are stored in more than 1,000 separate rooms within the walls of Vatican City, with additional funds extending to the deep underground vaults under the Cortile del Belvedere. The facilities are climate-controlled, monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and guarded by Swiss and Vatican security personnel. No document may be removed. No image may be copied without express permission. Even the cataloging system is partially restricted itself. In other words, you can get permission to study a topic, but you are not informed about what documents exist on it. Access was not permitted at all until 1881. It was then that Pope Leo XIII finally opened part of the archive to researchers, after centuries of total secrecy. But that measure should not be confused for transparency. The regulation is dense, and the bureaucracy eternal. For example, all documents produced after 1958 were prohibited until 2020, when Pope Francis made public the archives of the papacy of Pope Pius XII, earned during World War II. And even then, those records raised more questions than answers still. Because in those documents from the time of the war, some of the darkest suspicions are hidden now. Did the Vatican cooperate with Nazis? What do they know of the Holocaust? And when did they help organize escape routes for high-ranking war criminals through the so-called Ratlins? The archives made public hint at these questions, but do not answer them. Entire boxes still remain sealed. Complete correspondence is missing, and what we know only fuels the legends about what we do not. Let's consider the case of the Knights Templar. In 2007, a Vatican archivist accidentally rediscovered a 700-year-old document that was believed lost, the Chinon parchment. It revealed that Pope Clement V had acquitted the Templars of heresy charges in 1308. Contrary to the narrative used to justify their mass arrest and execution, the implications were explosive indeed. Not because it showed that there was a conspiracy, which in a way there was, but because it showed something even worse. That explosive truths can remain buried in silence for centuries and only be discovered by chance alone. What else was archived by mistake then? What else has been forgotten on purpose now? The immense influence of the Church in European politics for more than a millennium means that its archives are more than just religious texts. They're the minutes of empire. The Vatican acted as a spiritual power always. Yes, but also as a geopolitical actor, a tax collector, a censor, a kingmaker, and, occasionally, an inquisitor too. The popes crowned emperors often. The popes excommunicated monarchs often. The popes declared holy wars often. All of it documented, all of it stored, all of it still hidden for the most part. And it's not just about the big events either. The secret archives contain thousands of personal correspondences from figures such as Miguel Ángel, Galileo, and even Henry VIII, whose desperate petition to annul his marriage helped trigger the Protestant Reformation. There is the document Dictatus Papae that declares the supremacy of the Pope over all secular rulers. There is even a letter from Abraham Lincoln to Pope Pius IX. However, the most tempting documents are those that cannot be confirmed because even their existence is considered classified, such as the alleged correspondence between the Vatican and extraterrestrial intelligence. Yes, you read that correctly. Some theorists believe that the Vatican not only knows of the existence of extraterrestrial life, but has kept detailed records of sightings and possible interactions too. This theory is supported by the existence of the Vatican Observatory, a real astronomical research center with facilities in both Italy and Arizona. And then there's the cryptic quote from the 1990s by Jesuit Father Malachi Martin, who claimed that what is coming upon the earth is so horrible that the Vatican knows it perfectly well. He never clarified that. He died soon after. So, is it paranoia or just a matter of scale here? Because the truth is simply this. Any institution with 1,200 years of records, power without control, and an interest in controlling the narrative becomes its own mystery machine now. The Vatican is not just a church alone. It is an archive of the memory of the Western world. And the longer it remains sealed, the more dangerous its content becomes, if only in our imagination alone. Scholars fight tooth and nail to access even a small part of those shelves still. For every letter they are allowed to read, there may be 10 more blacklisted still. The Vatican affirms that this protects the delicate nature of old documents. It is understandable, but that is not the whole story. There are entire volumes of indexes that catalog documents only by date and title, lacking summaries. Think of it as a menu that lists meat, vegetables, unknowns, and leaves the rest to imagination. What is in the unknown archive? Why is it labeled like that? The answer could lie in the Vatican's philosophy of knowledge. Some truths are not meant for the majority. This idea that revelation is selective, that divine or historical knowledge must be protected from the masses, is deeply rooted in church history. From exclusively Latin liturgies to the persecution of translators like William Tyndale, the control of information has always been a spiritual strategy. And that leads us to the greatest secret of all, that the secret itself is the objective. Because, after all, the Vatican Archives are more than just a room. They are a border between what we know and what we are not allowed to know, between faith and fear, between the light and what may still lurk in darkness. Documents related to the life of Jesus Christ. In the catacombs of history, one name resonates stronger than any other: Jesus of Nazareth. He walked the earth for a little more than 3 decades, taught for 3 years, and was executed in less than a day. However, the impact of his life has echoed throughout 2,000 years of culture, conquests, colonization, and creeds. His story has divided calendars, empires, and ideologies. And while millions of people accept every word of the New Testament by faith, others have always wanted more. More details, more context, more certainty. Imagine this. Somewhere, sealed in a Vatican vault, there is a letter, an official Roman document from the day a carpenter's son was sentenced to death, or perhaps a diary written by a temple scribe, or even a scroll from a hidden witness, because its content did not fit into the narrative later canonized by ecclesiastical authorities. It is the ultimate religious X-file, a rumor that refuses to disappear. There are rumors, always rumors, that the Vatican possesses documents that provide a greater understanding of the life, trial, and execution of Jesus Christ. Not theological reflections, not gospels, but concrete Roman or Jewish administrative records of the first century. Real names, real places, real decisions. If they existed, they would be the most explosive texts in human history. Let's begin with what we know for sure. Jesus was born in Roman-occupied Judea sometime between the year 4 B.C. and 1 A.C. His life and death are mentioned outside the Bible by a handful of Roman historians, Tacitus, Josephus, and Suetonius, who offer brief derogatory references that confirm that a man named Jesus existed and that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. That is the historical scaffolding. Fragile, minimal, but present. Everything else comes from the Gospels, written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous authors who used secondhand sources. The Gospels are not court transcripts. They are theological narratives written with conviction, but without historical neutrality. Their objective is to inspire faith, not offer biographies. This creates an enormous black hole in the historical records, which has never stopped provoking speculation. Because what if someone somewhere kept more accurate records? The secret archives of the Vatican, the most obvious suspect, come onto the scene. As the institutional epicenter of world Christianity for more than 1,700 years, the Vatican has not only been the guardian of theology, but also the preserver of Christian history. Since the 4th century, popes have employed scribes, historians, diplomats, and collectors. Many of them were in charge of acquiring and preserving any document that had to do with the origins of the Church. If the official Roman documents on the arrest and crucifixion of Jesus survived, for example, the records of Pilate's governorship or a note from the high priest Caiaphas, it is not unreasonable to assume that they would have ended up in the Vatican archive and then silently disappeared from public access. One of the most persistent legends refers to a letter written by Pontius Pilate to Emperor Tiberius, in which he explains why he sentenced Jesus to death. Some versions claim that the letter expresses regret. Others say it is a cold, bureaucratic justification. Some even suggest that it contains Pilate's private belief that Jesus was divine, a term that would challenge all theological positions ever adopted on Judas, justice, and the role of Roma in the Passion. There are also stories of documents smuggled out of Jerusalem before the destruction of the temple in the year 70 A.D.C., scrolls hidden by early Christian sects, unearthed during the Crusades, and then moved to Roma. Some could even go back to the so-called lost years of Jesus' youth, about which the Bible says nothing. What did he do? Where did he go? Why did he disappear from records to return at age 30? Was he traveling, studying, or organizing? Some of these questions are addressed in apocryphal gospel texts such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, and the Gospel of James' childhood. These writings, discovered in Egypt and elsewhere, paint radically different portraits of Jesus: mystical, cryptic, and sometimes disturbingly human. The Vatican has long denounced them as heretical, but many scholars believe that the complete versions of these texts, including others never seen by the public, may still be preserved, possibly in their original Aramaic or Greek in the depths of the archives. And then there is the story of the Sibylline oracles. These ancient prophetic texts, partly Jewish, partly pagan, and partly Christian, were considered sacred in their day. They speak of a divine figure born of a virgin, unjustly crucified, and returning in glory. The early church considered them pre-Christian proof of Jesus' mission. If more versions of these oracles exist, especially those prior to the first gospel, they could fundamentally alter our understanding of prophecy, Jesus' identity, and the syncretic roots of early Christianity. But the most controversial theory is also simplest: that the Vatican possesses documents proving Jesus did not die on the cross, that he survived, escaped, and lived in anonymity, possibly in India or Egypt, where he continued teaching in secret. This fringe idea, inspired by Islamic and Eastern traditions, contradicts all pillars of Christian theology. It would unravel the resurrection. And yet, stories persist that somewhere in the archive, sealed under papal lock and key, there's a scroll or report suggesting just that. Whether it's a Roman clerical error, an anonymous gospel, or a traveler's diary, it doesn't matter. The Vatican would never make it public because the implications would be devastating. But perhaps it's not about what happened after the crucifixion, but before. Consider the idea that Jesus wrote something, a letter, a sermon, a private reflection. The Gospels show him as a speaker, not a scribe, but he was literate and versed in Jewish law. Is it so impossible that he wrote his thoughts down? What would such a document say? Would it coincide with the teachings of the Gospels? Would it contradict them? Would it be something ordinary? The possibility that Jesus left his own written words, buried, protected, and hidden for 2 millennia, has obsessed theologians and heretics. If even a fragment of such a text existed, it would be more important than the Dead Sea Scrolls, more explosive than the Nag Hammadi library. And if it contradicts the canon, the Church has every reason to keep it hidden. But the Vatican is not only hiding texts, it also hides decisions. In 1684, Pope Clement X supposedly removed 14 books from the official biblical canon. Among them were the books of Esdras, Tobias, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, and others. These are not obscure footnotes. They were an integral part of the faith for more than a millennium. Why were they removed? And with what authority? The official reason is doctrinal clarity, but many scholars suspect a darker motive. The deleted books contain chronologies, prophecies, and origin stories that complicate the clean narrative the Vatican wanted to promote. Some even speak of alternative messianic figures. Where are the original scrolls now? If anyone has them, it's the archive. And what about prophecy? This is the realm of the third secret of Fatima, which we will discuss in detail later. But many believe the Church has compiled a complete file of apocalyptic visions and messianic predictions, from medieval mystics to ancient astrologers. If Jesus predicted his return and left a chronology or a code, would it be revealed to the faithful, or would it be hidden to preserve order? The Vatican has a history of delaying or censoring this kind of information. Let us consider the Gospel of Barnabas, lost a long time ago, which portrays Jesus as a prophet, not as a divine figure, and predicts the arrival of Muhammad. It was condemned as a falsification, but original manuscripts may exist. If so, they are likely kept away from the public. But perhaps the most chilling rumor is also the quietest, that the Vatican has long possessed not one, but multiple contradictory accounts of Jesus' life, each presenting a different version of his message. One merciful, another militant, and another mystical. That these accounts were debated, weighed, and finally silenced during the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 D.C., the same council that helped define the Church's official doctrine. The minutes of that council, the rejected texts, the destroyed Gospels. If any of it had survived, it would be under lock and key in a city-state with its own laws, its own police, and its own definition of truth. It is important to point out that the Vatican does not deny all of this, nor does it confirm it. Their silence is strategic. By refusing to reveal certain documents or even confirm their existence, it preserves the mystery of divine authority. The archives become a metaphysical firewall, a line between the sacred and scandalous, a place where truth is stored and rewritten. Because power does not reside only in possessing the truth, but in deciding when and if it's revealed. That is what makes rumors so dangerous. If there is a letter from Jesus, a Roman report, or even a heretical gospel, and the church has hidden it, then all the martyrs, missionaries, and mystics who died for a narrative could have done so under false pretenses. And so we are left with silence, whispers, 84 kilometers of shelves, and a name written on the margin of an anonymous box waiting to be discovered. But not all mysteries are ancient. Some are terrifyingly recent. In 1952, a Jesuit priest claimed to have seen a document in the archive describing a solar event at the time of Christ's eclipse so strange that it defied any natural explanation. Was it a metaphor, a miracle, or was something else entirely? Something that was not of this world. Because just as some believe that the archive contains lost records of Jesus' life, others believe it contains records of life beyond Jesus. Life from other places, other worlds, other beings. Next, we dive into the inconceivable evidence of extraterrestrial life and why the Vatican might be the only organization on Earth that already knows we are not alone. If your mind is already reeling from what might be hidden about Christ's life, imagine what still remains sealed just a few shelves away. If you like unraveling the untouchable, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We have many more Vatican vaults to decipher. And while you're at it, tell us where you're following us from and what time it is there. Midnight in Manila, dawn in Sao Paulo. Let's bring a map of the mystery. Evidence of extraterrestrial life. It all starts with a telescope, a simple round lens pointing to the sky. Except this one does not belong to NASA, the ISS, or any national observatory. It belongs to the Vatican. Yes, the ancient religious microstructure of the Vatican, founded on divine revelation and angelic visits, is also dedicated to astronomy, and not casually. Since the late 16th century, the Catholic Church has managed some of the most advanced observatories in Europe and, later, throughout the world. Currently, it jointly runs the Vatican Observatory Research Group, VORG, from the top of a mountain in Arizona, using state-of-the-art instruments to study stars, galaxies, and phenomena far beyond Earth. This raises the question, why? Why would an institution dedicated to the spiritual truths of a small planet devote centuries and significant resources to studying the vast, indifferent mechanics of the cosmos? Because some believe they already know something and are watching. Deep inside the Vatican, secretly, buried beneath St. Peter's Basilica, behind armored steel doors and dust-covered shelves, there are said to be documents not about saints or sinners, but about something much stranger, encounters with beings. Records of celestial visits, UFO sightings, and even possible communications with life beyond this planet. It sounds like conspiratorial fantasy, until you take into account the Church's own strange openness to this idea. In 2008, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, then director of the Vatican Observatory, made headlines by declaring that believing in aliens does not contradict faith in God. In fact, he went even further. Just as there is a great variety of creatures on Earth, he said that there could be other beings, even intelligent ones, created by God. He called them our brothers. It wasn't about a rebellious priest. It was the Vatican's official scientific voice. And it wasn't the first time. For decades, the Vatican has danced a cautious and cryptic waltz around extraterrestrial life. It has never confirmed it, never denied it, but has always left the door ajar. And that has fueled rumors, theories, and high-risk speculations for generations. What if the Vatican is not only philosophically open to extraterrestrial life, but already knows of it? The theory goes as follows. Throughout the centuries, the Vatican has compiled not only sacred texts, but strange ones too. Reports from missionaries in America, Africa, and Asia who witnessed objects in the sky that defied all natural explanation. Medieval sketches of angelic visits that, when observed closely, resemble modern descriptions of extraterrestrial contacts, ancient representations of flying chariots and wheels in flames. Even pre-Christian documents preserved by the Church speak of stellar beings descending from the heavens. Each report is cataloged, each drawing preserved, not because they were believed then, but because someone thought they might be important later. The Vatican, as an institution, thinks in centuries. If the archive contains evidence or suspicions of non-human intelligence, that would explain the Church's obsession with cataloging the cosmos. It would also explain the unusually high number of astronomers and astrophysicists employed by a religious body. They are not looking for evidence. They are monitoring a known variable. Let's return to the telescope. One of the Vatican's most advanced observatories, the VAT, the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope, is on Mount Graham in Arizona. It is located in a region that the local Apaches consider sacred, linked in their traditions to the appearance of the men of the stars. The site was controversial, not only for spiritual but environmental reasons. However, the Vatican insisted. Why? What was so important about that mountain? And then there is the telescope with the strangest name that the Vatican owns, Lucifer. Technically, it is an acronym that means Large Binocular Telescope of Near Infrared with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research. But the choice of name, especially by a religious institution, feels provocative. Lucifer, the bearer of light, the fallen angel, the first to challenge divine authority. Why name a telescope in his honor? Unless the goal is not only science, but revelation. Think about it. If intelligent life exists beyond Earth, this poses a huge theological problem. Did Jesus incarnate for all sentient beings, or just humanity? Do aliens have souls? Do they sin? Is there an alien version of the Bible, of salvation, of divine justice? These are not idle questions. The Vatican theologians have been seriously debating these for decades. Theological journals have published articles with titles like Christology and the Cosmos, and Salvation and Extraterrestrials. Entire panels have convened to debate whether baptism would be necessary for non-human entities, implying, at a minimum, a real expectation that contact could occur. Now imagine that expectation is based on classified knowledge, documents from centuries past, artifacts, eyewitness accounts, or evidence of a cover-up. The modern phenomenon of UFOs, born after World War II, has always been shrouded in military secrecy. But even before Roswell, the Vatican had records of strange celestial events. In 1561, the inhabitants of Nuremberg, Germany, reported an aerial battle involving flying spheres and cylinders, witnessed by hundreds. The event was recorded in large-format newspapers preserved in the Vatican Library. In 1566, a similar event occurred in Basel, Switzerland. What did the Church do about it? Officially, nothing, but the records were kept, archived, and stored. Even in our century, the Vatican seems to have been watching. In 2007, it was reported that an orange disk had been seen flying above the Vatican. It was witnessed by many observers and even recorded on video. As expected, the images vanished. The Vatican issued neither statement nor denial, only silence. And silence here is revealing, because the Church does not usually ignore signs in the sky. Comets, eclipses, and blood moons have played a very important role in religious interpretation and prophecies. But this was different. It was not a celestial phenomenon. It was something completely different. So what does this archive contain? If only some of these rumors are true, it could contain records of pre-modern sightings classified as miracles or angelic apparitions, missionary reports from remote regions describing celestial ships or non-human beings, secret correspondence from the Vatican about observed aerial phenomena, astronomical data from observatories indicating artificial movements of celestial bodies, transcripts of alleged contacts, events, theological assessments on the status of extraterrestrial souls. Some even believe that there are metallic fragments, alien writings, something perhaps found during one of the Crusades, hidden not for danger, but for its implications. And that makes sense. The Vatican is the most powerful religious institution on earth. Its job is not only to protect the faith, but to interpret reality through the lens of that faith. If we are not alone and the public finds out first, theology loses its control. But if the Vatican already knows and manages the revelation, it stays in command. In this context, the Vatican's secrecy is not obstruction, it is strategy. There is another, even darker possibility. What if the Vatican is not only studying extraterrestrials, but communicating with them? Think of it. The idea, as far-fetched as it seems, has roots in both fringe science and fringe theology. In the 1990s, a document appeared on the internet claiming to come from an internal Vatican source. It spoke of a program called Civ Servigio Informi Vaticano, a secret intelligence agency operating within the Church. Its mission was to intercept and assess extraterrestrial communications. The document was quickly discredited, but like all good disinformation, it raised enough plausible doubts. Because this is the truth. The Vatican has always had its own intelligence network, its own diplomatic corps, its own global communication lines. If contact were to occur, who better to receive and conceal it? Theologically, it even fits. The Church believes in incorporeal beings, spirits, angels, demons. What does one more category matter, especially if it comes from stars? Some ancient Christian mystics even wrote about beings that were neither divine nor human, born of fire and light, observers in skies. They were exiled from the canon, but their writings were not destroyed. They were archived, and somewhere down there, deep in the labyrinth of shelves, keys, and whispered names, those writings await. The Vatican does not confirm it. Of course not, but it is not necessary. Its silence is eloquent. Its observatories point toward the sky. Its archives point inward. And someday, perhaps soon, those two vectors will collide. But before looking for hidden beings in the stars, perhaps we should look under our feet. Because under the marble and grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica lies a secret much older than UFO sightings, even older than the Church. A burial place, a necropolis, a city of the dead, and in its heart, a particular tomb. A tomb that, according to the Vatican, is the final resting place of the Apostle Peter. The truth about that claim is as mysterious and controversial as the tomb itself. Next, we descend into the ancient crypts of Rome to uncover the haunting, unresolved mystery of St. Peter's tomb and the Vatican necropolis. The Vatican necropolis and tomb of St. Peter. Long before the marble domes and the Swiss guards, before the popes dressed in white and the pilgrims with khaki shorts, the Vatican was a cemetery, not figuratively, but literally, a Roman necropolis buried in the depths of what is today the Basilica of St. Peter, an ancient city of the dead, excavated in the earth like veins in the bones. And in its supposed center, a unique tomb, modest and worn by time, holds one of the most controversial names in Christian history. Pedro, like St. Peter the Apostle, the rock, the man who, it is said, Jesus chose to build his church upon. The first pope, crucified upside down in Rome, according to tradition, was secretly buried by a few loyal followers. At least, that's the story. But in a place like the Vatican, stories aren't just stories. They are foundations. They're the base on which 13 billion Catholics stand. That is why, for centuries, a question has haunted the Church like a ghost in catacombs. Is it really Pedro who lies there? The Vatican has always answered unequivocally yes. The faith of the Church is sustained, literally, on that assumption. The Basilica of St. Peter, possibly the most emblematic building of Christianity, was built in the 4th century on what, according to what they told Emperor Constantine, was the burial place of the apostle. But for more than 1,600 years, nobody checked, nobody dared until the 20th century. It was 1939. Pope Pio XI had died, and his successor, Pio XII, wanted him to be in the Vatican grotto under St. Peter's Basilica. During the excavations, workers accidentally discovered a series of ancient tombs, walls, chambers, inscriptions, and an entire necropolis intact for centuries, hidden a few meters from the passage of tourists and clerics. And suddenly the question stopped being hypothetical. Suddenly, the Vatican found itself with a mystery on its hands. What they had discovered was the ancient Vatican necropolis, an extensive underground cemetery that goes back to the 1st century A.D.C. It was a place where Roman nobles were buried far from the sacred pomerium of the city limits, where burying corpses was prohibited. It contained elaborate tombs, rich with inscriptions and pagan iconography. But among them, there was something different. A modest tomb, without adornments, attached to an ancient red wall. The red wall. It was this tomb that most caught their attention, in part because of its location, right under the main altar of St. Peter's Basilica, and in part because of what was engraved on the adjacent wall as graffiti. Pedro is here. Only 3 words, or perhaps a miracle. But from the beginning, the tests proved confusing. The remains that were inside the tomb, if there were any, had been altered a long time ago. Some bones had been moved, others had been lost. The archaeologists were under enormous pressure, solving the biggest mystery in Catholic history without undermining Catholicism's most sacred affirmation. It was not an easy task. The Vatican kept the excavations secret for a decade. Only in 1950 did Pope Pio XII make public that the tomb of St. Peter had finally been identified. But not even then were the bones shown, nor photographs published, only a declaration wrapped in papal authority. Behind the scenes, the situation was even murkier. You see, the original tomb under the red wall did not have any name inscribed. There were no bones that could be conclusively linked to Pedro. The nearby wall, covered in graffiti, had the word Petro. Yes, but not as part of a formal epitaph. Rather, it seemed like a prayer, a devotion, not documentation. And the bones that were found in a nearby niche did not even match the demographics. It was later revealed that they belonged to several people. Some were not men, and others did not belong to the correct era. Then came an unexpected twist. In 1952, a box of discarded bones that had been kept in a marble-lined wall adjacent to the supposed tomb was re-examined. These were different. A skeleton, a man between 60 and 70 years old, tall, robust, missing his feet. Something crucial. Why is that important? Because early Christian tradition affirms that Pedro was crucified upside down. Unlike typical Roman crucifixions, in which the wrists and ankles of the condemned were nailed, upside-down executions often involve cutting off the body at the knees or ankles after death. The absence of feet coincided with that story. Finally, something fit. The bones were examined by Margherita Garducci, a famous archaeologist and epigraphist, who argued passionately and controversially that these were, in fact, the relics of St. Peter. She claimed that they matched the age, time, and place. And it was not a simple assumption. She pointed to the remains of purple and gold cloth, imperial colors of Rome, found next to the bones. She observed that the niche where they were hidden had been deliberately protected, sealed, and venerated. She even related microscopic samples of earth to the exact geography of the Vatican Hill, supporting the idea that these remains had never been moved. Pope Paul VI agreed. In 1968, he officially declared that the bones had been identified in a way that we can consider convincing. And then, silence. The bones were placed in a plexiglass box and hidden again in the depths of the basilica. Convincing, not proven, and, of course, not public. The scientific community remains divided. Some archaeologists accept the findings as probable. Others describe it as an illusion wrapped in a gloomy need. After all, confirmation bias runs very deep when the location of the tomb supports the legitimacy of the church itself. Which raises a deeper question. What if they are wrong? What if the Vatican has built its spiritual empire on a case of mistaken identity? Worse still, what if the bones are real and the church knows that they contradict the traditional story? There are rumors, of course. There always are. Some say that the bones analyzed showed signs of funerary rituals incompatible with Christian customs. Others suggest that the inscriptions on the surrounding tombs, many of which were damaged or erased during the excavations, do not refer to Christian martyrs, but to pagan cults. Some conspiratorially minded critics have gone so far as to propose that the Vatican discovered something heretical under the basilica that fundamentally undermines the apostolic succession and sealed it under theological quarantine. After all, the place was sacred to pagans long before it was to Christians. The Vatican Hill was not just a cemetery. It was home to an ancient pagan sanctuary. Roman families took offerings there. They honored their ancestors there. It is very possible that the tomb identified as that of Pedro belonged to a revered noble mansion, to a priest of Mitra long before the arrival of Christianity. But here is the genius of the Vatican in handling the tomb. They control the evidence. The bones are not in a museum. The graffiti wall is not available for public examination. Access to the necropolis is granted only to a chosen few and under strict surveillance. Even scholars who are allowed to study the site must do so under strict conditions. No photographs or independent tests are allowed. The Church has the last word on what is seen and what is believed. After all, faith thrives on mystery. But it's not just about bones. It is about the architecture of belief. The Basilica of San Pedro, built in the 4th century, demolished and rebuilt in the 16th, stands as a central monument to the authority of Pedro, to his martyrdom, to the idea that the Church is built, literally and symbolically, on his body. If the tomb is proven false, what happens to the metaphor, to the institution to which the metaphor gives power? Perhaps the most chilling question is this: what else was discovered down there? The records of the excavation are incomplete. Some records are missing. And in interviews, the first archaeologists hinted at unusual findings not relevant to the theological objective of the excavation. What does that mean? In a city with millennia of history, almost anything is possible. A legend claims that among the sarcophagi, a sealed chamber was discovered containing non-Christian relics, possibly scrolls. Another rumor speaks of a hidden staircase that descends even deeper into the rock and leads to a forgotten Roman temple. Some claim that it still exists. Others believe that it was silently walled up. And the Vatican does not comment. They have what they need: a tomb, a tradition, a story strong enough to build a religion. Whether it is true or not is secondary. What matters is that it is believed. But for those who want the truth, the harsh archaeological truth, the necropolis remains an enigma wrapped in incense. It can be visited. Technically, you can request a guided tour. A small and strictly supervised group is led through narrow, humid corridors under the basilica. You can see tombs, frescoes, the red wall, perhaps even a glimpse of the plexiglass display case containing the bones, but not the bones themselves, nor the DNA tests, nor carbon dating reports. Those are sealed, kept in the archive. So perhaps the best question is not whether it really is Peter. Perhaps the question is why they are so afraid of us finding out. Because if the answer is yes, if those are really the remains of the first popes, it would be a triumph of faith confirmed by facts. But if the answer is no, it is not just a tomb. It's a trapdoor. And underneath, a deeper chamber full of secrets waiting to be revealed. Because the bones of St. Peter are only the beginning. Next, we delve beyond the tombs and into the shadows of the past, into a story so strange that it seems like religious delirium, but that really happened. The 9th century, a dead pope, a living pope, and a court in which the corpse was the accused. It is called the Cadaver Synod, and it is the most grotesque trial in the long and tortuous history of the Vatican. The Cadaver Synod trial of Pope Formosus. In the dark chambers of the history of the Vatican, replete with accounts of martyrs, mystics, and miracles, there is a moment so grotesque, so absurd, so apocalyptically strange that it seems more like a satire written by a lunatic playwright than a theological account. But it happened. Everything. Rome. The year is 897 A.D.C. The Church, long considered the pillar of moral clarity, finds itself adrift in a sea of corruption, violence, and paranoia. Popes are not spiritual shepherds, but political weapons. The papal throne changes hands like a cursed crown, often stained with blood and always overshadowed by scandal. And in this whirlwind of ecclesiastical chaos appears one of the most macabre spectacles in all of human history. A pope is judged, but not just any pope, but a dead one. It is about the cadaver synod, horrenda in Latin, an event so surreal and theatrically grotesque that it continues to baffle historians, theologians, and readers more than 1,000 years later. Because when Pope Stephen VI ascended to power, he was not content to discredit his predecessor by his number. He ordered Pope Formosus, who had died 9 months before, to be exhumed, dressed in papal vestments, and dragged to a court to be tried for crimes against the church. The charges: perjury, ambition, and illegally assuming the papacy. The defense: a literal corpse. Let's go back. Pope Formosus was a controversial figure, even in his life. Born around the year 816, he ascended in the ranks of the church with a relentless ambition. A skilled diplomat, he was sent on missions to France and Bulgaria. He was intelligent, respected, even feared. But his political maneuvers often earned him enemies, especially among rival factions vying for control of Rome. At that time, the papacy was less about spiritual guidance and more about political influence. The Italian noble families, Frankish kings, and Roman warlords treated the Vatican like a chessboard, and Formosus was a bishop who refused to play by their rules. He allied himself with powerful foreign leaders such as Arnulf of Carinthia, whom he crowned emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in 896. This angered the rival Spoleto family, which considered itself the legitimate ruler of Italy. When Formosus died in 896, most likely from natural causes, though even that is still controversial, his enemies waited. And less than 1 year later, they attacked. Enter Pope Stephen VI, a puppet of the Spoleto. Stephen was placed on the throne with one mission: to erase Formosus from history. Not figuratively, but literally. What followed was a public spectacle of medieval madness that defies all logic. The corpse of Formosus was exhumed, in a state of decomposition, barely sustained. They dressed him in the complete papal attire, the mitre and pallium, seated on a throne inside the Basilica of the Lateran. His skeletal fingers were pierced with rings. His skull, tilted at an unnatural angle, was framed by a crown of worms. In front of him, Stephen VI presided over the trial, his face flushed and trembling with rage. A deacon stood next to the corpse to speak on his behalf as a reverse ventriloquist. The courtroom was packed with clerics, soldiers, and spectators. Some prayed, others booed, all caught in the gravitational pull of this ecclesiastical horror show. Stephen launched into a diatribe, accusing the dead pope of violating canon law by becoming Bishop of Rome while still possessing the See of Porto. He denounced that Formosus had conspired against previous popes, that he had usurped divine authority, and that all his acts as pontiff, all his declarations, were invalid. And then the sentence came. The trial concluded with a declaration of Formosus's guilt. Thus, his papacy was declared null. His corpse was stripped of its sacred vestments. The 3 fingers of blessing on his right hand were cut off, symbolically silencing his spiritual authority. The body was dragged out of the basilica, thrown into a mass grave, and later exhumed again and thrown into the Tiber River. A pope exhumed, judged, mutilated, and discarded like garbage. It was not a secret ritual. It was not whispered in shadows. It was official, public madness. A desecration of the dead so violent, so theatrical, that even today it makes anyone who hears the story tremble. And yet, perhaps the most disturbing thing is this. It almost made sense, because in the 9th century the papacy was a weapon and the church was being torn apart by warlords and dynasties who did not see Rome as sacred land, but as the ultimate prize. Because Formosus had enemies. Those enemies had power. And in a world without accountability, Stephen VI decided that a man's bones could be judged to rewrite an entire era of spiritual authority. But he miscalculated. The corpse had shocked even medieval Rome. The desecration of a pope, however controversial, was too much. The public that had previously cheered or booed now recoiled. Riots broke out. The clergy rebelled. Within months, Stephen VI was imprisoned. According to chroniclers, he was strangled to death in his cell, either by outraged monks or a faction loyal to Formosus. The corpse had outlived his accuser. After Esteban's death, a rapid retreat began. The next pope annulled the cadaver synod. Then another pope revoked that annulment. The church wriggled and contorted, trying to erase the stain of history without losing its institutional authority. It became a theological game in which each pope condemned or condoned the madness, depending on which family held power. Even Formoso's body was involved in the ping-pong. After being taken out of the Tiber by a compassionate monk, his remains were reburied in the basilica. A few years later, they were moved again and again. Like a cursed relic, the cadaver refused to remain still, an eternal reminder that no pope is really safe from the whims of his successors. Perhaps the most chilling thing is how little has changed, because deep down the cadaver synod has to do with control. The control of memory, legacy, and truth. The dead cannot defend themselves, but their reputation is still a weapon. It is tempting to laugh at the absurd. A court with a corpse as defendant, a deacon whispering to a skull. But under the horror hides something much darker. The idea that authority cannot simply erase the past. You can rebuild it. That history is not written by the victors. The survivors rewrite it. The cadaver synod was not an aberration. It was a mirror, a moment in which the church showed its teeth, in which the robes became armor, in which dogma became theater, and when the corpse of a pope became a puppet for revenge. In the following centuries, the church tried to bury the event repeatedly. It was absent from the first stories. It was minimized in the theological chronicles. It was treated as an embarrassing footnote, but it never completely disappeared, because the time the Vatican judged a dead pope is not forgotten. The image of rotten hands raised in forced contrition is not forgotten. It is not forgotten that tombs are not always for the dead, that sometimes the dead are summoned not for reverence, but for revenge. Today, the cadaver synod exists in the shadows of Catholic history, from an era in which faith was wielded like a dagger. But its spirit lives on in every sealed document, in every suppressed file, in every version of the truth edited for convenience. Because sometimes the church not only silences the dead, sometimes it speaks through them. But despite its grotesque spectacle, the cadaver synod is just a body in a cemetery of secrets. Because while Formoso was exhumed for political reasons, another legend suggests that the Vatican has long kept a secret about an entire papacy that never officially existed. The papacy of a woman. A legend so persistent, so blasphemous and seductive that even today the Vatican refuses to acknowledge its possibility. Next, we explore the myth, the scandal, and the mystery of Pope Joan, the woman who may have occupied the throne of St. Peter, only to be erased from history by the same institution she led. The disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi. In the heart of the smallest country in the world, surrounded by marble saints and bulletproof glass, a girl disappeared without a trace. Not from a dark alley, nor from an anonymous block of buildings, but from the Vatican City, the epicenter of the Catholic Church, a place considered one of the safest and most sacred on earth. Her name was Emanuela Orlandi. She was 15 years old, a citizen of the Vatican City and daughter of a mid-ranking employee of the prefecture of the papal household. She lived in an apartment within the walls of the Vatican, in a building owned by the church. Her life was quiet, routine, and private until one afternoon in 1983, when, after leaving her music class in Rome, she disappeared without a trace. Nobody, no crime scene, no closure, just silence. And from that silence, 1,000 questions arose. None of them answered. The disappearance of Emanuela Orlandi is more than just an unsolved case. It is a labyrinth, a whirlwind of conspiracies, cover-ups, and confusion in which each new clue opens a deeper chamber of secrets. More than 4 decades later, it is still one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in the Vatican. Not only for what could have happened, but for what has not been said yet. Let's go back to the start. It was June 22nd in 1983. Emanuela left home around 3:30 p.m. to attend her weekly flute class at the Tommaso Ludovico de Victoria School, located near the Piazza di San Apollinare, on the outskirts of the Vatican walls. She was a bit late. She called her sister from a public telephone at 7 p.m. and told her something strange, that a man had approached her that day to offer her a job selling Avon at a fashion show. She seemed uneasy. She told her that they would talk more when she got home. She never arrived home. At 11 p.m., her family panicked. They called the police, Vatican officials, everyone they could, but no one seemed very concerned. A missing teenager. She had probably run away, gotten into some trouble. She would be back in the morning, but that wasn't so. And then the calls began. Over the next few weeks, the Orlando family received cryptic calls from people claiming to know where Emanuela was. Some were made anonymously. Others gave names like Mario and Pure Luigi. The callers claimed that Emanuela had joined a religious group voluntarily, that she was with friends, or that she was being held as a hostage. And that's when the story went from a missing person case to something darker. According to the callers, Emanuela had not only disappeared, but was now a bargaining chip. Specifically, they said she was being held in exchange for the release of Mehmet Ali Agca, a Turk who had tried to assassinate Pope John Paul II in 1981. Agca had been arrested after firing 4 shots at the Pope in St. Peter's Square, wounding him in the abdomen, right hand, and left arm. Miraculously, the Pope then survived. Agca was imprisoned. But now, someone was demanding his release and using a 15-year-old girl from the Vatican as leverage. The Vatican dismissed the calls as a hoax. So too did the Italian police. But the Orlando family believed them. They felt desperate. They begged the church to investigate, to make a public appeal, to speak to all the world. The Vatican refused for decades. That silence would define the whole case, because as the years went by, new theories emerged, and each was worse than the last. The first theory, the political one, suggested that Emanuela had been kidnapped by a group seeking to pressure the Vatican to release Agca. Some pointed to the Grey Wolves, a Turkish far-right organization known for links to Agca. The logic felt murky. Why attack a citizen of the Vatican? Why target a teenager? But the timing was suggestive. The threats felt specific. And Agca himself later claimed from prison that she was alive and being held in a convent. He also said that she had been kidnapped by the Bulgarian Secret Service on orders from the Kremlin. But Agca said many things, and many of them were demonstrably false. The second theory focused on the Vatican itself. This version, which was whispered in the corridors of clerical power and splashed the sensationalist press, stated that Emanuela had been the victim of a prostitution network that operated within the Vatican. A network in which high officials of the church, diplomats, and possibly even cardinals were involved. According to this version, Emanuela had witnessed something she shouldn't have, or was deliberately chosen as target. She was kidnapped, silenced, and then hidden. In 2012, a new spark reignited the case. A leaked document, supposedly by a Vatican cardinal, appeared in the Italian media. It seemed to be a memorandum in which the expenses related to the care of Emanuela in foreign convents were discussed, which hinted that she had been transferred throughout Europe under the supervision of the Vatican. The church denounced it as forgery. Then, in 2018, things escalated again. A journalist reported the Vatican received an anonymous clue. The remains of Emanuela were buried in the Teutonic Cemetery, a private Vatican cemetery adjacent to the Basilica of San Pedro. The clue referred specifically to tombs under a statue of an angel holding a scroll. The Vatican agreed to open the tombs. The cameras recorded everything. The world watched. But when the marble was lifted, both tombs appeared empty. There are no coffins, bones, or remains of the long-deceased German princesses who were supposed to be buried there. Only stone and silence. It was a cosmic joke or a message. Some speculated the bodies had been moved recently to avoid discovery. Others believed the tombs had been empty for decades. A ruse, a false clue. Then came the ossuary. During the search, workers found a hidden room near an underground chamber full of bones, human remains of dozens of individuals. The Vatican ordered DNA tests. The results were vague. The bones were ancient, centuries old. They were not from Emanuela. They were useless. The clue went cold again. And during all this time, the Vatican remained hermetic. They expressed sympathy, promised cooperation, but refused to disclose internal documents. They denied any institutional involvement. They claimed they had nothing to hide. Which raises a question. If that's true, why so much secrecy? Why did it take the Vatican 36 years to open its own files on the Orlandi case? Why were the family's repeated requests for transparency ignored? Why did the Vatican police do so little in the first hours when time was critical? Why were some areas of the Vatican City never searched? It's not paranoia. It's a pattern. And that pattern points to something deeper in the institutional instinct for secrecy. Not necessarily out of guilt, but out of habit. The Vatican is a realm of silence, a fortress built upon discretion. For centuries, it has hidden scandals, censored truths, and buried stories. Opening the door to the case of Emanuela Orlandi isn't just about finding a girl. It's about what could come to light. Because it's not just about a missing person. It's about money, organized crime, and power. Some investigators believe that the Orlandi case is related to the Banco Ambrosiano scandal, a massive financial collapse in the 1980s that exposed the deep connections between the Vatican Bank, the mafia, and dark offshore entities. The theory is as follows. Emanuela's father, Orlandi, worked at the Vatican Bank. He saw or said something, and his daughter was kidnapped as a warning. It sounds far-fetched until one remembers what happened to Roberto Calvi, president of Banco Ambrosiano. He was found hanged under London's Blackfriars Bridge in 1982. His death was declared a suicide. Later, murder. He had pockets full of cash and stones tied to his legs. He was nicknamed the Banker of God. The message was clear, and perhaps that message extended to Vatican City itself. Even so, the Orlando family never gave up hope. Emanuela's brother, Petro, became the public face of the search. For decades, he organized vigils, filed lawsuits, appeared on talk shows, and begged the Vatican for answers. He marched through Rome holding her photograph. He confronted cardinals. He met Pope Benedict XVI and later Pope Francis. Reportedly, Francis told him, "Emanuela is in heaven," which is not an answer, but a tombstone. And yet, despite everything, the false leads, sloppy investigations, and evasiveness of the Vatican, the case remains open. In 2023, after renewed public pressure, the Vatican announced a new investigation. A prosecutor was appointed. The files were promised, but many believe it's too late. Too many years, too many lies, too many missed opportunities. And Emanuela remains frozen in time. A 15-year-old girl with thick glasses, a broad smile, and a plastic flute. Her face appears on posters, graffiti, and documentaries. Her name is whispered in corners of cathedrals, is a symbol of secrecy, injustice, and a mystery too dangerous to solve. Because perhaps it is not just about what happened to her. Perhaps it is about what discovering the truth about the Vatican would reveal, its connections, its ability to remain silent. And in that silence, the echo of a final question. If the Church cannot protect one of its own within its walls, under the watchful eye of its God, what does it protect? The answer may not be found among the living, but among the dead. Because the case of Emanuela is not the only papal mystery shrouded in shadows. Before her, another pope disappeared, not from public view, but from the papal throne. A man who ruled for only 33 days and then died in the night. Next, we examine the most controversial papal death in modern history, that of Pope John Paul I and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his brief final reign. The mysterious deaths of the popes. Pope John Paul I. He was called the Smiling Pope. Albino Luciani, a man of gentle manners, sharp intellect, and disarming humility. When he stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica on August 1st, 1978, newly elected and stunned, he greeted the crowd with shyness, not grandiloquence. There was no papal theatricality, no grandiloquent blessings, just a soft-spoken Venetian blinking in the Roman sun, overwhelmed by the weight of a 2,000 kilograms throne. He took the name of John Paul I, a hybrid title in honor of his two predecessors, and with it he inherited the darkest chapter of the Church's modern legacy. But 33 days later, he died. Just like that. Without warning, illness, or last words, just a body found slumped in bed in the early morning of September 29, 1978. The official cause, heart attack. The unofficial explanation, a Vatican cover-up. Because from the moment Pope John Paul I died, the story became a tangled knot of contradictions, omissions, and secrecy. A tapestry of errors so atrocious that even the most devout Catholics began to whisper, was it really natural, or was it something else? Let's start with the facts, or what little we know about them. At approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, Sister Vincenza, the Pope's personal assistant, knocked on the door of his papal apartment to bring him his morning coffee. There was no answer. She waited, then knocked again. Nothing. Finally, she entered the room and found the Pope sitting on the bed, with his glasses on, a pile of papers in his hands, lifeless. The Vatican was immediately alerted, and from that moment on, the story began to change. First, the Vatican claimed that John Paul I had been discovered by his secretary, not by the nun. This turned out false. This change was probably made to avoid the awkward image of a woman alone inside the Pope's private chambers. Then, confusion reigned about who was notified first. The Vatican press office was not informed until hours afterward. The public announcement was made late in the morning, after rumors had already begun to spread. No autopsy was performed. That decision alone caused outrage. The Vatican claimed it wasn't necessary. Italian law did not require an autopsy for deaths in the Vatican, and the Pope had supposedly suffered from low blood pressure. But John Paul I had no known history of heart problems. There were no signs of discomfort the previous night. He had just met with cardinals, laughed with his aides, and even joked about upcoming changes. What changes? That's where the conspiracy starts. Because in those 33 days, Pope John Paul I had already made very powerful enemies. Reportedly, he was planning a radical purge of the Vatican hierarchy, a cleansing of corruption, nepotism, and secrecy. Rumors were circulating that he had drawn up a list with the names of cardinals, bishops, and financial operators linked to scandals inside the Vatican Bank. He had expressed alarm at the growing influence of Masonic lodges in church affairs, a taboo subject. Some say he was preparing to dismantle the murky financial network that had trapped the Vatican for decades. That network led directly to the Istituto per le Apparitions Religionae, the Vatican Bank. At that time, the bank was embroiled in a web of financial deals, criminal partnerships, and shady investments. One of its main figures was Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American prelate known for his size, his power, and his iron grip on Vatican finances. Marcinkus had deep ties to Roberto Calvi, the aforementioned banker of God, who later turned up dead under a bridge in London, with his pockets full of bricks. According to some informants, Pope John Paul I was increasingly concerned by what he was discovering. He had asked questions, demanded reports, and even suggested that Marcinkus be removed. Then he died. Coincidence? Maybe. But the Vatican's behavior afterward only served to increase suspicions. There was no death certificate, no clear chronology, no matching reports on whether the Pope had complained of chest pains the night before. One cardinal claimed that he had received a call from John Paul I late in the afternoon, in which he sounded lively and determined. Another said that the Pope had been writing notes at his desk until almost midnight. And then there's the paper. When they discovered his body, he was holding a folder of documents. Some say it was a draft sermon. Others claim it was a list of pending appointments. But a persistent rumor alleges that it was a dossier containing names, accusations, and plans to eradicate corruption within the Curia. That paper never reappeared. It disappeared like the Pope himself. Was it just Vatican clumsiness, bureaucratic panic, or something far worse? Theories flourished, and one name appeared repeatedly. Propaganda Do, or P2. P2 was a clandestine Masonic lodge that operated in Italy and was composed of high-ranking politicians, military leaders, businessmen, and supposedly Vatican officials. Its influence was profound, so profound that the Italian government ended up outlawing it. The journalists who investigated P2 were threatened. Some disappeared, others turned up dead. And in Vatican circles, it was rumored that Pope John Paul I had discovered the Masonic infiltration in the church, possibly even in the College of Cardinals, that he had planned to unmask them, and that someone, somewhere, decided that he would not live to do it. The Vatican has never responded to these accusations. It does not need to. Its silence is its firewall. But in 1984, the British author David Yallop published an explosive book, In God's Name, in which he exposed in detail the theory that Pope John Paul I had been assassinated. Yallop named names and described methods. He suggested that the Pope could have been poisoned with digitalis, a drug that can cause heart failure without leaving obvious traces. The book sold millions of copies. The Vatican condemned it as fiction, but the questions never disappeared. Because beyond the conspiracy, beyond the tangled mess of Masons, bankers, and cardinals, lies the human tragedy of Albino Luciani, a man who never sought power, who walked with humility, who refused to be crowned with the traditional papal tiara, who insisted on using I instead of the papal we, who once told a friend before his election that the idea of becoming pope filled him with dread. "I am not the man," he said. Perhaps he was not. Or perhaps he was the only man capable of breaking the spell. The spell of the Vatican's silence, financial corruption, and ritualized power. And that made him dangerous. It is tempting to mythologize him, to turn him into a martyr, the last good pope, the one who got too close to the truth. But we will never know because the Vatican will not reopen the case, will not exhume the body, and will not publish the documents. They have canonized him. They have declared him blessed. They have turned his life into a miracle. That is enough for them. But holiness is not the same as clarity. And holiness does not answer questions such as, who saw him last? Why was an autopsy not performed? What happened to the documents he had in hand? And, above all, who benefited from his death? The answer is buried not only in the Vatican grotto where his body rests, but in the 52 kilometers of archives that are above, in the memos, letters, transcripts, and files that no one could see. And if the death of a pope can disappear in that silence, what else has disappeared? Because John Paul I is not the only pope who has died in suspicious circumstances. There are others. Urban V, who supposedly tortured cardinals. Clement II, possibly poisoned. John XII, who is rumored to have died in bed with a married woman. The papal office can be infallible. But the men who wear the tunic are mortal, fallible, vulnerable, sometimes too vulnerable. And if the Vatican is capable of hiding the suspicious death of a modern pope, imagine what else it could hide. Not only about death, but about condemnation. Because while some mysteries remain buried, others are invoked. In the next chapter, we delve into one of the most secret courts in church history. An institution so shrouded in rituals and silence that most Catholics have never heard of it. However, it has the power to forgive sins that no other priest can touch. They call it the Apostolic Penitentiary, and its secrets are darker than confession. If 7 layers of Vatican secrets have not scared you yet, you are exactly the kind of person we're doing this for. Press the subscribe button so you don't miss what is coming next. From here on, everything gets darker. And listen, while we decipher codes, leave us your location and the time when you're watching this. Is it 3 a.m. and you're still awake in Warsaw, or is it lunchtime in Lima? Let's see who else has joined this nocturnal pilgrimage with us. The Apostolic Penitentiary. In the extensive secret architecture of the Vatican, where marble masks lie in silence is confused with holiness, there's an office so dark, so theologically arcane, that most Catholics have not even heard of it. And those who have only speak of it in whispers. It is not a court in the traditional sense. There are no televised trials, no gavels, no defense lawyers, or dramatic cross-examinations. There is only sin, a sin so grave, so rare, so defiling of the soul that it cannot be forgiven by any priest, nor by a bishop, not even by most cardinals, only by the Pope or, more precisely, by the hidden priests who serve in his name. Welcome to the Apostolic Penitentiary, the most secret court of the Catholic Church, and possibly the strangest legal institution in the world. Founded in the 12th century, but formalized in its current form by Pope Alexander III in the late 12th century, the Apostolic Penitentiary is often described as the Court of Mercy. But its name, imbued with the aesthetics of ancient justice, suggests something more severe: penitentiary. The word itself oozes prison resonances. It evokes steel bars, chains, guilt. It does not sound like a court of mercy. It sounds like a spiritual prison. And, in a way, it is. This office deals with sins so rare, so canonically catastrophic, that their absolution is reserved for the highest levels of ecclesiastical authority. We're not talking about everyday faults, nor about jealousy, nor about gossip, nor about missing Mass on Sundays. We're talking about reserved sins. Sins that strike at the very heart of Catholic doctrine, so corrosive that they fracture the ritual scaffolding of salvation itself. Among them, profaning the Eucharist, that is, throwing away or defiling the consecrated host, physically assaulting the Pope, violating the secret of confession. A priest who reveals what a penitent has confessed, absolving an accomplice in a sexual sin. A priest who commits a sexual sin and then tries to absolve the person with whom he sinned, trying to ordain a woman as a priest. It's not just about sins. They are nuclear spiritual events, and when they occur, they trigger a canonical blockade. The local clergy are prohibited from dealing with them. The sinner must appeal directly, through an elaborate secret process, to the Apostolic Penitentiary. If approved, the sinner may obtain absolution. If not, he remains spiritually excommunicated, separated from the sacramental life of the Church. Let's talk about the process. The penitentiary is located within the Apostolic Palace, not very far from the papal quarters, but spiritually and procedurally it exists in another dimension. It is headed by the major penitentiary, one of the highest-ranking cardinals of the Vatican. His identity is known, but his actions are not. Its function is to safeguard the internal forum of the Church, the realm of conscience, confession, and moral judgment that lives beneath the surface of public doctrine. Cases are presented in writing, always anonymously. Even the name of the sinner is hidden. The details are typed, translated into Latin, and all data that could identify the author is removed. The goal is not to judge, but to judge in silence. Mercy is exercised in the dark. Once the documents arrive, they are reviewed by a team of theologians and canonists. They debate the nature of the sin, its gravity, and its contrition. If absolution is granted, it is communicated to the confessor, not to the penitent, who in turn grants forgiveness under the secret of confession. Nothing is publicly recorded. No trace is kept in any record that can be accessed. The whole process is wrapped in a secret so thick that, technically, not even the Pope can know the identities of those involved. And that poses the first terrifying question. Why? Why create a court so secret, labyrinthine, and immune to transparency? The official answer is to protect the dignity of conscience, to safeguard the inner sanctuary of moral repentance from public scrutiny. The unofficial answer is because, if the truth were known, it would shake the Church to its very foundations. Let's consider a hypothesis. A priest commits one of the reserved sins. Let's say he sexually assaults someone and then tries to absolve the victim during confession. That is not only a crime, but a canonical abomination. But according to the rules of the penitentiary, the offender's name can be omitted. The bishop cannot be notified. The civil authorities do not intervene. If the priest requests absolution through the court and it is granted, the case disappears into the fog. There is no accountability, no justice, only forgiveness. The sin is washed away, but the damage remains. Now, multiply it by centuries, because this office has existed for almost a millennium. Think about what that means. How many priests have confessed heinous acts, received absolution, and returned to ministry with a clean spiritual record? We will never know, because the Vatican does not keep public statistics, and a major penitentiary rarely speaks. When he does, it is with careful theological riddles. In 2009, Cardinal James Francis Stafford briefly commented on the work of the office, noting that cases often involve extremely serious matters of conscience. But when pressed for examples, he refused, as is his duty. The secret is absolute, but the implications are chilling, because the apostolic penitentiary does not only deal with sin, it deals with power. It is the internal bleach of the Vatican, its moral reset button, the place where the worst imaginable things are resolved spiritually without becoming real to the outside world. And perhaps most disturbing of all is that it also grants indulgences. Yes, indulgences. Those infamous vestiges of medieval theology that once sparked a reformation. The idea that spiritual punishment in purgatory can be reduced through prayer, pilgrimage, or paperwork. The apostolic penitentiary oversees the granting of plenary indulgences, the total forgiveness of temporal punishment for sins. In the year 2000, the Great Jubilee, the office was flooded with requests. Millions of Catholics passed through the holy doors of cathedrals around the world, believing that with each step they erased lives of suffering in purgatory. And who approved that theology? The apostolic penitentiary. But while indulgences are publicly announced, the court's darker function remains hidden, concealed behind layers of canon law and marble corridors known only to a few. This secrecy raises another question. Has the apostolic penitentiary ever been used as a political tool? What if a confession does not only refer to a personal sin, but to crimes of the church? What if a bishop confesses to covering up abuses, or a cardinal confesses to conspiring against a successor of the pope? What happens in those cases? Do they disappear? Do they come to light? Or are they kept in filing cabinets labeled in Latin, sealed with red wax, and hidden in the only place that not even the fiercest guardians of the Vatican can access? The archive? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. The apostolic penitentiary and the Vatican secret archives are not separate realms. They are branches of the same tree. One purges sin, the other purges history. And when used together, they create a perfect storm of plausible deniability. The court acquits the soul. The archive erases the record, and the world never finds out. This is not coincidence. It is theology made politics. And what is truly terrifying is that everything is legal. Each process, each decree, each hidden document exists within the Church's canonical right. Technically, no secrets are kept. They are only protected. Crimes are not covered up, but sins forgiven. The distinction is theological, but consequences are real. Real victims, real pain, real blood. And while the faithful pray in candlelit chapels, behind closed doors of Vatican court whispers about sins too shameful to see light. No press, no jury, no voice for the injured, only mercy, sanctified, sterilized, sealed away. In the end, the apostolic penitentiary is not only a court. It is a paradox. A court that offers forgiveness without exposure. A process that heals the penitent, but not the wound. A place where the most condemnable acts receive the gentlest response. Silence. But the court is not the only structure of the Vatican wrapped in ritual and secrecy. Because while some sins are hidden in archives, others are hidden in art, in architecture, in symbols carved into ceilings and painted in the eyes of the saints. Next, we head to the ornate Vatican walls to explore the symbols and hidden messages in art and architecture. And the question they whisper: what truth has been painted for centuries, hiding in plain sight symbols and hidden messages in art and architecture? Walk through the Vatican, and you feel deliberately overwhelmed. Every inch, every tile, every corner radiates a divine authority. It is not only a city, it is a representation. A 110-acre stage where marble and pigment preach. Angels ascend in ceiling frescoes. Saints suffer in sculpted agony. Gold drips from every altar like the blood of the Sacred Heart. It is a spectacle and also a distraction. Because under the splendor, under the brushstrokes and the statues, there's something else that moves. Symbols, codes, messages. And if you know where to look and how to look, the Vatican begins to speak with a different voice. A voice not limited by the catechism, but by iconography. a visual lexicon whispered through oil and stone, one that suggests that there is another story hidden beneath the one they tell us. Let's begin with the Sistine Chapel, the masterpiece of Miguel Ángel, the ceiling that changed Western art. It is famous for its technical genius, its anatomical detail, and theological narrative. But if we dwell too much on elements, reverence turns to suspicion. Let's take the creation of Adam, possibly the most iconic image in Christian art. God peers from a cloud of angels and cherubs, with fingers extended toward Adam, in the moment before life, a divine spark. But look closely. That cloud from which God emerges is not just any cloud. Anatomists have long pointed out that its shape and internal components mirror the human brain. The cerebrum, the cerebellum, even the vertebral artery are represented with astonishing precision. Let us remember that Miguel Ángel was an anatomist. He dissected corpses secretly. He knew exactly what he was painting. So what did he mean? That God is a construction of mind, that the divine lives not above but within. His theological dynamite, coated in fresco, protected by beauty. And he's not the only one. Let's move to the final judgment, painted later on the altar wall of the same chapel. It is a huge, terrifying composition. Christ in the center resurrects the dead, sending souls to heaven or hell. But look at the figure of Saint Bartholomew. He holds a human skin, a symbol of his martyrdom. It hangs like some grotesque mantle, but the face on that skin is that of Miguel Ángel, a self-portrait trapped in skin, hanging between salvation and condemnation. Why? Was it humility? Was it rage? Was it confession? The message is unclear, but the symbolism, surgical. Miguel Ángel wasn't alone. Let's take, for example, the School of Athens by Raphael in the Apostolic Palace of the Vatican, a pagan celebration of philosophy painted in the heart of a Christian institution. Plato and Aristoteles dominate the center, flanked by Pythagoras, Euclides, and Tommaso. There are no crosses, halos, or mention of Christ. And yet, this painting sits a few meters from the Pope's rooms. Why? Because it's not only a celebration of knowledge. It is a silent revolution. Raphael subtly introduced portraits of his contemporaries. Leonardo as Platon, Miguel Ángel as Heraclito, even himself looking from one side. He wove secular genius in his sacred space. He blurred the line between revelation and reason, and the Church let him, or perhaps needed him. Because the Vatican's greatest secret may be this, that it has always hidden truth within beauty. It buries contradiction under spectacle, heterodoxy under harmony. Dangerous ideas aren't banished. You frame them, you hang them on the wall, and you wait. Let's go into the Bura apartments, the private rooms of Pope Alejandro V, one of history's most scandalous pontiffs. The walls here are painted with swirling pagan mysticism. The Egyptian goddess Isis, the bull god Apis, signs of the zodiac, alchemical symbols in the Pope's private rooms, painted by Pintoyo at the request of the Pope himself. They aren't Christian motifs. They are esoteric, Gnostic, Hermetic, a visual fusion of pre-Christian spirituality and post-Christian theology. It is as if the Vatican didn't hide paganism, but embraced it. Why? Because at the heart of every empire, spiritual or temporal, is a need to control narratives. And the Vatican has always been a master of this. It did not destroy paganism. It absorbed, renamed, and rewrote it. The Roman temples became churches. The Mitraic rites became Eucharistic rituals. The Alma Invictus became Christ's birthday. What is one more symbol on a wall, anyway? Go out to the plaza of San Pedro. In its center, an Egyptian obelisk, a monument of 400,000 years of antiquity, originally constructed for the sun god Ra. It was brought to Rome under Caligula. The first Christians would have seen it as a symbol of the empire and of paganism. Now, it is in the center of Catholicism, flanked by the gigantic embrace of the colonnade of Bernini. The pagan pillar is now a monument crowned with a cross that symbolizes Christian dominion. Or so they say. But that obelisk is not only decorative. It is placed with precision, aligned with solar events. The plaza functions as an enormous solar clock that projects shadows to mark the hour of the day and the seasons. The light of the sun, the shadows, the symbols, the geometry at the service of God. Or is it the other way around? The architecture of Bernini is full of these secrets. In the baldachin over the tomb of San Pedro, the twisted columns rise in a spiral like chains of DNA 200 years before DNA was discovered. The design reflects the ancient columns of the Temple of Solomon, which are said to contain esoteric wisdom. On its bronze surfaces are carved bees, a symbol of the Barberini family, laurel leaves for victory, and serpentine symbols of regeneration, duality, and temptation. Each centimeter whispers something. Even the floors of the Vatican are mosaics of geometric patterns, with a labyrinthine design. Many are based on the cosmatesque technique, a medieval Italian style that incorporates sacred geometry with the purpose of reflecting the divine order of the universe. When walking on them, you're stepping on a map of metaphysical equilibrium. It is not only about art. It is theology and code. Then there is the Vatican Library. Beyond the known bookshelves are maps and manuscripts that suggest that the Church knew certain geographic realities well before secular explorers. Charts of the stars with a precision prior to the telescope. Anatomical drawings centuries before the Enlightenment. Alchemic symbols. Kabbalistic diagrams. Did the Church hide them? Or did it simply keep them, knowing that the power resides in controlling not the truth, but access to it? Because after all, that is the true message of the art of the Vatican. Access is everything. The secrets are in sight, but only if you have been taught how to read them. That is why visitors marvel before the Sistine Chapel without understanding that they are contemplating a blasphemy disguised as sanctity. That is why scholars analyze the frescoes of Raphael without asking themselves why pagan philosophers were canonized in the painting. That is why the pilgrims kneel before the obelisks without knowing that in their day they were altars for Ra. This is not deception. It is design. Because art, unlike doctrine, is elusive. It allows the Church to have it all, to preach monotheism while exhibiting pagan iconography, to celebrate the saints while painting self-portraits in their likeness, to affirm orthodoxy while embedding esotericism in each brushstroke. The Vatican has always known that power resides not only in what is said, but in what is shown and in what is not explained. Because if too much is explained, the mystery dies. And without mystery, the spell breaks. But some symbols cannot be hidden forever. Let us take as an example the recurring motif of the pineapple that is found in ancient Assyrian temples, in Egyptian carvings, and prominently in the Cortile della Pigna of the Vatican, the patio of the pineapples. An enormous bronze sculpture in the shape of a pineapple is in the patio, flanked by peacocks. Officially, it is just a Roman fountain. But in esoteric traditions, the pineapple represents the pineal gland, the third eye, the gateway to divine knowledge. Why is it in the center of the Vatican courtyard? Is it just a coincidence, or another message sculpted in bronze, left to rust outdoors in the sun? There is another symbol lurking in the corridors. The labyrinth hidden in the patterns of the floor, reflected in the architectural symmetry, a motif of travel and return, confusion and clarity. It appears in mosaics, garden paths, and ceiling designs. It is not just decoration. It is a metaphor for the Church, the human soul, and the Vatican itself. A place where the faithful wander in search of answers, only to find more corridors, symbols, and silence. And yet, the path is never random. It is designed, because the Church not only paints the truth, it curates it. It shows you what you're allowed to see and hides what it does not want questioned. But even hidden truths have shadows. And some shadows are darker than symbols, deeper than architecture. Some are underground, under the chapels, under the museums, under the frescoed ceilings and the bronze saints, lies a tunnel, a secret passage, an escape route used by the popes in times of danger. A path that does not lead to salvation, but survival. Next, we descend through the cobbled stones and closed corridors of the Passetto di Borgo, the Vatican's secret passage, and the mysteries hidden in its walls. The Pact of Borgo. It begins like something out of a Dan Brown novel, except it is real, not speculation or allegory. A wall, corridor, lifeline. They call it the Passetto di Borgo, or simply the small passage. An elevated tunnel of 800 meters of stone and shadows that runs like a secret artery from the Basilica of San Pietro to the Castel Sant'Angelo. The imposing fortress that stands on the Tiber River like an ancient sentinel. From above, it looks like part of the city wall, unnoticed by tourists who pass underneath. But inside those narrow confines hides one of the Vatican's oldest escape plans. Built in the 13th century, possibly on even older Roman routes, the PTO was never just architecture. It was a contingency, a corridor dug out of fear, a backup plan for when divine protection failed. Because, despite all its holiness, the Vatican has always been a fortress, and every fortress needs an exit. The Passetto was famously used in 1527 during the sack of Rome, when the troops of Emperor Carlos V, of Catholic confession, turned against the Pope. Rome was plunged into chaos. Blood flooded the streets. The churches were sacked, the priests massacred, more than 40,000 citizens murdered, and Pope Clement III did not disappear into thin air, but took refuge in the PTO. While the mercenaries ravaged the Vatican and killed all the Swiss guards, Clement slipped through the passage. Hours later, he appeared behind the fortified walls of Castel Sant'Angelo, shocked but alive. The passage had worked. The Pope had fled, but the PTO is not just a tunnel. It is a threshold between the sacred and secular, between palace and prison, between the illusion of divine protection and the raw need for real-world strategy, and its existence raises uncomfortable questions. Why does the Vicar of Christ need an escape tunnel? What kind of threats was the Vatican preparing for? Who else could have used it? And what has it been used for since then, if it has been used? The official answer. The PTO is a relic, a historical artifact, a monument to an era of swords and sieges. It is no longer used. It is only preserved. But come in, eat, if you are ever given permission, and the air will tell a different story. There is not only dust. There is silence. Too much silence. Like a throat holding a scream back. The walls are thick, the ceiling low. It rides like a snake through the Borgo neighborhood, just above the heads of unaware tourists. The windows, narrow slits, are not designed to let light through, but for archers. It is a corridor designed to be defended, to be maintained at any cost. Even today, there are rumors of hidden doors in the passage, secret exits to side chapels, trapdoors leading to catacombs, vaults sealed since the Renaissance. Some believe that during the Second World War, senior members of the clergy used the Passetto to transport Jewish refugees out of the Vatican undetected. Others say that the passage was used more recently to discreetly move sensitive people or objects away from cameras and crowds. Is it still in operation? The Vatican does not say. The passageway is rarely open to the public. When it does, access is limited, supervised, and fragmented. Only a part can be seen. The rest is sealed, preserved, yes, but in silence. And that silence is revealing, because corridors like the Passetto are not just a place of retreat. They are a place of control. Control of movements, of narratives, of exposure. If a pope needs to disappear into a fortress, a helicopter or a car waiting for him, he does not walk through St. Peter's Square, but uses the PTO or any modern equivalent that now fulfills that same ancestral function. And the Vatican is very good at modernizing old functions. But this is where the legend breaks into something deeper. Some say that the PTO was never just a physical tunnel. That under the ID, parallel to it, there's another passageway which does not appear on any map, a ritual corridor that is not used to escape, but for initiation. The theory is as follows. In the Middle Ages, certain clergymen were initiated into secret rites, not officially recognized by the Church, but tolerated by it. These ceremonies required isolation, silence, and sacred geometry. The PTO, with its precise length, height, and curvature, supposedly coincided with the ancient architectural codes used in pre-Christian mystery schools. Does it sound absurd? Not if one takes into account how often the Church has reused the symbols and spaces of the very heresies it intended to destroy. Let us remember that the Vatican absorbed the temples of Rome, the festivals of the pagans, and the symbols of occultism. The PTO could be a continuation of that spiritual corridor as much as logistics. Others believe that the corridor houses something more than dust and memories. Smugglers used it during the Renaissance. It is said that, under cover of night, boxes with forbidden books, texts by Galileo, pagan manuscripts, and heretical gospels were transported through the Passetto. A story that is whispered insistently among the Vatican guides tells of a black chest that was moved through the tunnel during the papacy of Pius IX. It was said that the chest contained a living cargo, a prisoner. Who or what was inside still remains unclear. The chest was never opened in public. It was taken to the Castel Sant'Angelo. It never left. Is the story true? Nobody knows, but is not the only one. There are reports, unconfirmed of course, that the PTO has been used to move relics in times of unrest. When the mobs threatened the Vatican during the unification of Italy. When Mussolini's black shirts became unpredictable. When Allied bombs fell too close to St. Peter's. The documents and sacred object from the dome of St. Peter's were supposedly channeled through the tunnel and hidden inside the fortress. The logic is simple. If the Vatican is compromised, the Church must protect its memory. And that memory is physical parchments, bones, artifacts, confessions. If only one relic suggests a truth different from the one preached from the altar, it must be saved or hidden. And that takes us to the heart of the mystery. The Vatican has always treated knowledge as other empires treat treasure. It accumulates it, keeps it, and moves it at night. And the PTO is its armored messenger. That is why it is important, because it is not only about what has passed through that passage. It is about what could still be down there. Are there walled-up sections? Hidden rooms? Cryptique inscription? Every few years, the rumor resurfaces that there at a lower level to the PTO, an underground passage that intersects with the ancient Roman sewer systems and the early Christian catacombs, a corridor prior to the 13th century structure that the first popes used to flee from the persecutions of Nero. Archaeologists have tried to track it, but the Vatican does not allow excavations near the corridor without permission, and permission is rarely granted because the Church protects its arteries. The PTO is not just a historical curiosity. It is a living system, the physical embodiment of the dual nature of the Vatican, divine on the surface and strategic in the entrails. It is a reminder that popes are not only pastors, but sovereigns, that behind theology hides the machinery of survival. And it is also a metaphor, a hidden passage in plain sight, used only in times of crisis, denied until it is needed, and then disappeared like so many other things in the Vatican. Because if the PTO is real, concrete, traceable, undeniable, what other corridors are metaphorical? What other tunnels exist in doctrine, in the archives, in rituals? Ways to transmit knowledge without being detected, the truth without revealing it, history without consequences. The PTO is the visible one. But there are others, and some of them go much deeper into places that even the Church does not admit exist, such as the underground vaults under the Vatican Library, the deepest and most inaccessible archives in the world. Some say that inside those chambers, hidden under layers of rock and time, there are texts that should never have been read. Not only forgotten gospels, but writings that challenge the scriptures, predict the future, or record visits for beings not of this world. Because when you have secured an escape route from earthly danger, what about the danger from the stars? Next, we examine the strangest and most controversial artifact ever related to the Vatican. A machine that, it is said, transcends time, looks back, observes the crucifixion, the resurrection, history itself, as if it were a movie. They call it the chronovisor. And according to those who claim to have seen it, the Vatican not only invented it, but hid it. The chronovisor, buried in the fog of the Vatican legend, is a story so implausible, so defiantly strange, that even the most experienced conspiracy theorists hesitate before saying it aloud. A time machine, not metaphorical nor allegorical. A real device built, tested, operated, and then buried under layers of secrecy so dense that it may never be proven. A device that, supposedly, would allow its user to see through the fabric of time. Not travel through it, but observe it, witness any moment in history, reproduced as archival images on a cosmic reel. They called it the chronovisor, and according to the stories, the Vatican built it. Let's start with the man at the center of the myth. Father Pellegro Ernetti, a Benedictine monk, musicologist, and exorcist with a sharp mind and sharp tongue. He taught at the Conservatorio Benedetto Marcello in Venice and was respected in academic circles for his work on Gregorian chants and ancient musical notation. But Father Ernetti also had another claim to fame. It was only whispered to a chosen few. In the 1950s, he said he was recruited by a group of scientists and priests working on a secret Vatican project. Among them were Nobel Prize-winning physicist Enrico Fermi and aerospace engineer Wernher von Braun, the man who would build NASA's Saturn V rocket. Their mission was to build a device capable of seeing past events by capturing the electromagnetic residues that, they said, remained in the fabric of space-time. The idea was that every action, every word, every gesture left a permanent trace, like the heat from a blown light bulb. If you tuned into those frequencies, you could see history. It was bold. It was crazy. It was plausible. According to Ernetti, the group was successful. The machine, christened chronovisor, was the size of a large closet. It was manufactured with cathode ray tubes, dials, antennas, and strange alloys whose names were not public. It looked like a Cold War Frankenstein replica, a mixture of science and mysticism, but it worked. And what did they see? This is where the story becomes cosmic and strange. Ernetti claimed that they observed the crucifixion of Christ, not artistic interpretations or visions, but the real event. They saw Jesus stagger through Jerusalem. They saw him nailed to the cross. They saw him die. They also supposedly saw the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Cicero giving speeches in the Roman Senate, Napoleon in Waterloo, representation of a long-lost Latin play, Tiestis by Quintus Ennius, which Ernetti later claimed to have reconstructed from memory, which unleashed an intense academic debate. It sounds impossible, absurd, blasphemous. But this is where things get weird. In 1972, an Italian newspaper, La Domenica del Corriere, published an article on the chronovisor. It included a photograph, a grainy black and white image supposedly captured by the device. It showed a dying man, with his eyes turned upwards and mouth twisted in suffering. The Vatican never confirmed the image, but neither did deny it. Later, the photograph was discredited, as it was supposedly a representation of Christ made by a 20th century sculptor, a reproduction, a hoax. But if it was a hoax, why did Ernetti insist it was not? Why, on his deathbed, did he stand firm on his story? And why did the Vatican issue a cryptic statement shortly after the article's publication, warning that anyone who used such a device would be violating the sanctity of divine time? A strange and revealing phrase. Critics dismissed the whole saga as science fiction. Ernetti was accused of delirium, seeking attention, or stupidity. The photograph was mocked. The script of the play that he published under his own name was dismissed as false, but others were not so sure, since the Vatican, let us remember, never revealed the device's existence. But neither did it deny it. And that is the Vatican strategy when something is real. Not to deny it outright, but to remain silent, create ambiguity, leave enough room for doubt to become belief. Let's assume for a moment that the chronovisor existed. And then what? The implications are monstrous. With such a device, the Church could resolve historical disputes precisely, authenticate relics, confirm miracles, refute heresies, see the Council of Nicea, observe the resurrection, and even see the original authorship of controversial scriptures. It would be the ultimate ecclesiastical weapon, a theological microscope. But it would also be a responsibility. Because what if the crucifixion did not happen as the scriptures say? What if the resurrection seemed more metaphorical than miraculous? What if Peter never arrived in Rome? What if Jesus was not alone on that hill? A device that sees through time also sees through doctrine, and that is dangerous. Which brings us to the supposed response from the Vatican. According to people close to earn it, former members of the Vatican who dared to comment on the matter, the chronovisor was dismantled. Dismantled, disassembled, hidden. The reason? Too powerful, too unpredictable, too subversive. If it were revealed, the very structure of the church could crumble. Because, after all, faith is based on mystery. The chronovisor destroys mystery. It turns the divine into data. In the world of theology, certainty is heresy. But what if they did not destroy it? What if the church, instead of dismantling it, simply moved it? The Vatican is known for moving delicate objects, unlabeled boxes, sealed vaults, files under review. Some believe that the device still works. It is kept in an underground laboratory under the Vatican Library, accessed by a coded elevator guarded by scientific clerics sworn by oath, a handful of men who possess the keys to the past. Or maybe it is not in Rome. Some claim the chronovisor was smuggled out during the papacy of Juan Pablo II, fearing it would be stolen by intelligence agencies. Others say that it was given to the Jesuits, known for their global reach and deep involvement in scientific research. There are even wild apocalyptic rumors that the device has seen the future, that it was used to observe not only history, but also prophecies, events yet to happen, the end of times, the rise of new empires, the second coming or final judgment. And that is why it was hidden, not for what it showed about the past, but for what it showed about what is to come. Some voices, former members of the church, have hinted at this. In an interview from the 1990s, Father Malachi Martin, a former member of the Vatican and author of Windswept House, suggested that the church possessed such terrifying knowledge that it could collapse society. When asked if he was referring to extraterrestrial contact, he replied, "No, worse." He never explained it. He died in 1999 in what some describe as suspicious circumstances. But the question persists. If the Vatican had a way to observe the crucifixion, would it tell us if it has real visual evidence that Jesus lived, died, and resurrected or not? Would it make them public or keep them hidden? Not because they would refute the faith, but because they would make it irrelevant. Because if you can rewind to God like a video, if you can pause the passion, slow down the resurrection, you no longer need to believe. You have images. You have replaced faith with forensic science, and the church cannot survive that. So maybe the chronovisor was destroyed. Or maybe not. Maybe it is still down there, humming softly in a dark chamber of the Vatican, projecting spectral images on a wall. Scenes from Eden, from Calvary, from the Council of Trent. Perhaps the device is now more myth than mechanism. Perhaps it never existed. But even if it did not exist, its story still matters because it speaks of our deepest fear and our deepest desire to know. To stop guessing, to stop believing, to observe. But the Vatican is not prepared for that. It prefers to keep its secrets sealed, its history curated, its truth in layers. The chronovisor tears off those layers. It makes everything visible, and in the Vatican, visibility is the only sin too dangerous to be forgiven. But this is not the only story of accumulated knowledge and hidden light. Because long before anyone claimed to build a time machine, the church was already deciding which books belonged to God and which should disappear. Next, we unravel the dark literary purge that still resonates on the margins of modern Bibles. The books missing from the Bible. The question that no priest wants to answer. What did God say that we could not read? The books missing from the Bible. In every hotel drawer, in every church pew, in every devout home, there's a Bible bound in leather or imitation leather or in a battered paperback edition, page after page of translated verses. From Genesis to Revelation, a sacred backbone. But here's a question that no one wants to ask. Who decided what was included? Because the Bible, contrary to what some believe, did not descend from heaven fully formed. It was compiled, selected, edited, and drafted, the result of centuries of political maneuvering, theological disputes, and ideological wars. And along the way, some books disappeared. Some were deliberately omitted. Others were lost, only to be found centuries later in desert caves or under the ruins of churches. A few remain whispered ghosts in the Apocrypha, mentioned by prophets but never seen. And the Vatican knows more than it says. Let's start. In the year 1684, Pope Clement XI, a contradictory man, patron of the arts and scourge of heresy. That year, under his mandate, 14 books were officially removed from the Standard Bible edition. These are not unimportant footnotes, but rather complete books. Among them, books 1 and 2 of Esdras, Tobit, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, Sirach Baruch, the Prayer of Manasseh. 1 and 2 Maccabees, added to Daniel and Esther. These are not marginal texts. They have been considered sacred for centuries. They were included in the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament used by the first Christians, cited by the Church Fathers, preached from the pulpits, and then erased. The reasons given were doctrinal clarity to normalize the canon and avoid any confusion. But the Vatican has always favored control over clarity. And these books were problematic because they did not fit the narrative. Let's take the Wisdom of Solomon, for example. It describes the journey of the soul through the concept of reincarnation, now considered heretical in Christian doctrine. Let's take 2 Maccabees, which speaks openly of prayers for the dead and the concept of purgatory, too theological for Protestants and a minefield for reformers, or Baruch, which contains a prophecy about the Babylonian exile that directly contradicts the chronology used by church historians. Then there is Esdras. In 2 Esdras, also known as 4 Esdras, the text prophesies the return of an invisible Messiah, not as a man of peace, but as a cosmic avenger. Fire, destruction, and heavenly armies. It is apocalyptic science fiction wrapped in scripture. And in its day, it was included in the first English Bibles before being discreetly removed. Who made this decision? Rome. Because the Church does not only interpret the Word of God, she decides what is valid. And for centuries, that decision was made behind closed doors in the Vatican. But let's delve in deeper. Because the books removed in 1684 were not the first to disappear. During the first centuries of Christianity, there was no fixed Bible. Local churches used what they had: letters from the apostles, copies of the Gospels, fragments of Jewish scriptures, dozens of texts circulating through the spiritual bloodstream of the early church. Then came the councils: Nicaea, Hippo, Carthage, rooms full of bishops, emperors, and agendas debating what should be included and what should be excluded. Among the victims were the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, the Gospel of Judas, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Epistle of Barnabas, and the Book of Enoch. Each of them was discarded not because they lacked spiritual value, but because they challenged the growing orthodoxy. Let's take the Gospel of Thomas. Discovered in 1945 near Nag Hammadi in Egypt. It contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus. Many coincide with the canonical Gospels. Others not so much. In Thomas, Jesus says that salvation does not come through faith or sacrifice, but through self-knowledge. The kingdom of God is within you. He says it is outside you. No miracles, no passion, just mysticism, too Gnostic, too dangerous. Or the text of the Gospel of Mary, in which Mary Magdalene is not portrayed as a passive follower, but as a disciple of wisdom who is entrusted with secret teachings that the male apostles reject. In it, Peter becomes jealous. He wonders why Jesus trusts a woman more than them. This is not a theological wrinkle. It is a power struggle, one that the church resolved as it always does, with silence. The Gospel of Judas is even more explosive. Found in the 1970s and authenticated decades later, it completely twists the narrative of the Passion. Judas is not a traitor. He is the most faithful of the disciples. Jesus tells him to hand him over because it is part of the divine plan. Judas does not betray. He obeyed. Imagine rewriting 2 millennia of Holy Week. The Vatican did what it had to do. He did not burn the text. He buried it. But perhaps the most disconcerting omission is the Book of Enoch, an extensive apocalyptic epic that was once highly appreciated by the first Christians and that is quoted in the New Testament itself. It speaks of angels who fell from the sky, mated with human women, and birthed giants. It describes visions of heaven, cosmic kingdoms, the names of fallen angels, and the architecture of divine punishment. It is the Book of Revelation on steroids. Why was it eliminated? Because it was too strange, too wild, too revealing. It suggests a world pandemic. It gives names to demons. It maps heaven like celestial Google Earth. And if you think the Vatican has a problem with people asking too many questions about the afterlife, Enoch is a drag. It is the type of text that is kept in a vault next to those that deal with exorcisms and encounters with extraterrestrials. Which leads us to a darker question. What has not been found? If these books, hidden in caves, forgotten in monasteries, have come to light centuries later, what is still missing? What is still buried? What is still sealed in the Vatican Archive? Because the archive is not just a warehouse of old papers. It is a memory bank, a black box for theological disasters, a place where problematic texts go to die. Some believe that there are complete gospels down there that have never been seen. Early versions of Mark and Matthew, original Hebrew versions of texts now lost in translation to Greek. Writings of apostles not recognized by the church. A gospel of Peter, a gospel of Philip, a gospel of the 12, perhaps even a gospel written by Jesus himself. Impossible? Not if you ask the right scholars. Some believe oral traditions may have been written down in the first century and then suppressed. If Jesus left any writing, letters, parables, notes, where'd they end up? Not to the Library of Alexandria, nor to the British Museum, but to the Vatican. What if those texts contradict the official story? What if they describe Jesus not as divine, but as human, not as a king, but as a revolutionary, not as a sacrifice, but as a symbol? It is not just about theological debates. They are existential threats to an institution built on very specific interpretations. And that is why they have disappeared. Or rather, they have been kept hidden. Because the Vatican understands something few understand. Words are power. Narrative is control. And by choosing which books are part of the Bible, they do not only define God, they define reality. So the next time someone hands you a Bible, leather-bound and gilded, remember that it is not the whole story. It is the official history. And the rest continues waiting in caves, in archives, in sealed strong rooms under the Apostolic Palace. Next, we move to one of the most persistent rumors about the Vatican. It is not about the scriptures, nor the saints, but a secret society, a hidden alliance of wealth, power, and rituals that, it is said, operates behind the facade of faith. They call them the Illuminati. But the real question is, what role does the Vatican play within secret societies? And why won't they admit they have played both sides for centuries? The Vatican's role in secret societies. If power has a smell, the Vatican smells of old velvet and candle smoke. But beneath that perfume of incense and tradition, there's a colder aroma. One that lingers behind closed doors of the marble halls, where silence is law and history is a weapon. Because not all power is public, and not all alliances are sacred. Some wear robes, others rings, some whisper in Latin, others in code. And for centuries, a question has been latent beneath the surface of Catholic history, bubbling both in papal conclaves and in occult rumors. Is the Vatican allied to secret societies? And more importantly, has it always been? To answer that, we must discard some assumptions. First, that secret societies are marginal, that they operate in shadows because they are small, weak, and irrelevant. No, some secret societies are more powerful than governments, older than constitutions, immune to the rise and the fall of kings. And the Vatican isn't afraid of them. It may have contributed to their creation. Let's begin with the Illuminati. The name alone evokes images of pyramids, all-seeing eyes, hooded initiates who run the world from smoky backrooms. Founded in Bavaria in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, the Illuminati began as a group of experts from the Enlightenment, an intellectual rebellion against the church and state. They were anti-monarchist, anti-clerical, and anti-authoritarian. Naturally, the Vatican hated them. Or not. This is where things get strange. Weishaupt was a Jesuit, educated by the church, and trained in its methods of discipline, rhetoric, and secrecy. And although he later rejected its theology, his organizational style, his cells, his degrees, and his symbolic hierarchies reflected the very structure of the Society of Jesus. The Jesuits were founded in 1540 by Ignacio de Loyola. Officially, they were missionaries and educators. Unofficially, a spiritual militia dedicated to obedience, loyalty, and internal silence. They operated as a military order with theological justification, information gathering, political influence, and infiltration. Does that sound familiar? For some, the Illuminati were not a rebellion against the church, but a branch of evolution. Same methods, different objectives. And the Vatican knew it because, although it excommunicated Weishaupt and condemned secret societies and radical bulls, such as the Eminenti Apostolatus of 1738, it also copied their tactics for centuries. The church had already dabbled in clandestine alliances. They needed them to protect themselves for propaganda, for politics. Let's return to the Knights Templar. Originally created to protect pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land, the Templars became a powerful transcontinental order of military monks with banking privileges. They controlled vast properties, only answered to the Pope, and invented financial instruments centuries before their time. Then, they became too powerful. In the early 14th century, King Philip IV of France had an overwhelming debt to the Templars. So he accused them of heresy, sodomy, and devil worship. On Friday the 13th of 1307, he ordered them arrested, tortured, and burned. The Vatican yielded. Pope Clement V dissolved the order under pressure. But many believe that the Templars simply went underground. They formed the basis of later secret groups, such as the Masons, the Rosicrucians, and, yes, the Illuminati. In this version of history, the Vatican not only destroyed the Templars, but inherited their secrets. And that pattern is repeated with the Masons, for example, officially condemned by the Church and declared incompatible with Catholicism. Being a member of Freemasonry implies automatic excommunication. But behind closed doors, that line blurs. During the 19th and 20th centuries, it was discovered that numerous clerics were members of Masonic lodges, especially in Italia, Francia, and España. Some joined due to influence, others due to ideology. Others, however, may have been assigned to observe, infiltrate, or manipulate. Because the Vatican is not naive. It knows that power does not always wear a cassock. Sometimes it wears aprons, and other times it wears both. In 1976, the scandal broke. A journalist revealed the existence of the propaganda due, an illegal Masonic lodge that operated within the circles of the Italian elite. Politicians, judges, military, bankers, and yes, Vatican officials. At the center of the storm was Licio Gelli, a fascist sympathizer and grandmaster of the P2. His lodge was accused of planning coups, laundering money, and orchestrating high-level assassinations. And intertwined with the P2, the Vatican Bank, the IWAR, became a laundering channel of illegal funds related to the Banco Ambrosiano, whose president, Roberto Calvi, was found hanged under Blackfriars Bridge in 1982. His death was ruled a suicide, then murder, with bricks and cash in his pockets and around his neck. Rumors of the Vatican. Pope John Paul I had begun to investigate these connections. Then he died after only 33 days in office. A heart attack, they said. No autopsy was performed, they added. You don't need a hidden decoder to draw the lines. Freemasonry, banking, the P2, the Vatican, dead bankers, dead popes, and a trail of corpses that leads to closed doors and sealed archives. But the Vatican's links with secret societies are not limited to the Masons. There's also the Order of the Jesuits itself. The so-called Black Pope, nickname of the Superior General of the Jesuits, wields enormous power behind the scenes. Some believe that he even outranks the visible Pope, that the Society of Jesus functions as an internal intelligence agency with agents around the world, deep-rooted loyalties, and centuries-old secrets. Does it sound like fantasy? Ask anyone with inside information from the Vatican, unofficially, who really pulls the strings in papal elections. Many will smile and say nothing. Others will point to Opus Dei, the ultra-conservative Catholic institution to which Pope John Paul II granted personal prelature. With billions in assets, political connections throughout Europa and America Latina, and a reputation for internal secrecy, Opus Dei has been accused of sectarian behavior and undue influence on church decisions. It also wears the mask of devotion, but moves like a network. Then there is the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, a lay Catholic religious order with 900 years of age, diplomatic status, passports, and its own internal hierarchy. It answers to the Pope, but functions as a shadow state. In recent years, power struggles between the order and the Vatican have come to light, including the forced resignation of its Grand Master due to ethical and financial disputes. And yet, these groups continue to exist, have never been dissolved, and have never been truly repudiated. Which leads us to the most damning theory, which is that the Vatican not only opposes secret societies, it is one of them. Think about it. Hierarchical degrees, initiation rites, symbols, Latin mods, sworn secrecy, special clothing, restricted archives, a single central leader with supreme authority. The Vatican does not look like a spiritual community. It looks like a ritual order. Its theology functions as a doctrine. Their priests function as ranks. Their cathedrals are like temples. Their artifacts are relics. Their rituals, the baptism, the confirmation, the Eucharistic mirror, the stages of esoteric illumination. And at the top, the Pope, a living symbol of divine authority, infallible, wrapped in white, guarded by an elite nucleus, living in a city-state with its own rules, borders, currency, and legal system. It is not a religion. It is a mysterious, sovereign cult. And once you see it that way, everything fits. The Vatican does not need to fear secret societies. It competes with them. Or perhaps, more exactly, it absorbs them because the Church has always played the long game. When it could not destroy paganism, it gave it new purpose. When it could not end heresies, it buried them. When it could not control politics, it infiltrated it. The Manual of Secret Societies was written in Rome and is still being used. But not all mysteries are political. Some are astronomical. Some look up, not down. The destiny of the Knights, the Templars, the treasure, and the true history. It begins with blood. On October 13th, 137, a Friday, a dawn raid throughout Francia, nights interrupted by sleep, chains, fire, screams behind the walls of the monasteries, and then silence. The Order of the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, better known as the Knights Templar, had officially come to an end, or so it was said to the world. But what followed was not peace. It was absence, the evasion of explanations. Because when King Felipe IV of Francia and Pope Clement V orchestrated the destruction of the most powerful military order in Christendom, they expected resistance, gold, armies, fortresses. Instead, they found almost nothing. The Templars' fleet had disappeared. Their treasury was empty. Their leaders had been captured, but strangely resigned. It was as if the Templars had known what was coming, as if they had already moved their most valuable possessions out of the reach of kings and popes. That is where the mystery begins. Because for more than 700 years, there have been rumors that the Templars did not die. They went underground and took their treasure with them. Let's rewind. Founded in 1119, the Templars were elite warrior monks who had sworn poverty, chastity, and obedience. But they were not just swords for hire. They were bankers, architects, diplomats. They invented the precursor to modern checking accounts. They ran a trans-European network of shelters and financial centers. They accumulated land, relics, and favors. In the 13th century, they were untouchable, which made them dangerous. Felipe IV was ruined. He owed money to the Templars. He feared their loyalty to the Pope above his own crown and wanted what they had: power, gold, and secrets. So he fabricated charges: heresy, idolatry, sodomy, spitting on the cross. The Templars were arrested, tortured. Many confessed, then recanted, and were burned. And yet, no treasure was recovered, neither from the Temple of Paris, nor from the preceptories of Champagne or Poitou, nor from the island fortresses. Nothing. Then where was it hidden? And what exactly was it? Most assumed that it was gold, jewels, documents, but others believe that the Templars possessed something more valuable than wealth. Knowledge. Let's begin with the Temple of Solomon. The headquarters of the Templars in Jerusalem was supposedly built on the ruins of the Second Temple. During their first years in the Holy Land, they were not fighting. They were excavating beneath the Temple Mount. Some believe they found ancient relics, writings, and forbidden texts. Some say they found the Ark of the Covenant. Others whisper that they found the Holy Grail, not a cup, but a lineage, the proof that Jesus had descendants, a revelation that would shatter Christian theology if it were revealed. And what did they do with it? They hid it, not only in vaults, but also in symbols, rituals, and architecture. After the dissolution of their order, the Templars dispersed. Some fled to Portugal and renamed themselves the Order of Christ. Others were absorbed into local orders. Some, according to legend, sailed west across the Atlantic centuries before Cologne. But others remained hidden in plain sight. Their symbols, two knights on horseback, red crosses, balanced swords, began to appear in new places, in Freemasonry, in the Rosicrucian orders, in secret architectural plans of cathedrals, in coded manuscripts, even within the Vatican itself. Because the Templars had once been the Pope's private army, some believe that part of that alliance never really died. It simply went underground. Think about it. When Pope Clement V dissolved the order under pressure from King Philip, he did so reluctantly. There was no formal trial, no conviction, just a papal decree alleging political necessities. Even the ecclesiastical archives of the trials, known as the Shinon Scrolls, remained hidden for centuries. When they were rediscovered in the Vatican Archives in 2001, they revealed a shocking truth. The Pope had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy. They were never excommunicated, nor declared heretics. So, what was the real reason for the purge? To eliminate a political rival, or seize their secrets. There's a theory that Pope Clement did not destroy the Templars. He absorbed them. He took what they had, texts, relics, astronomical charts, perhaps even Gnostic Gospels, and hid them in the depths of the Vatican, under St. Peter's Basilica, in the secret archives, in the layers of silence beneath Rome. And the treasure, if it was not physical wealth, was intellectual. The kind of treasure that could rewrite theology, dethrone kings, and, if leaked, change the world. But what happened to the gold? Legends say it was moved by sea. On the night of the arrests in France, a fleet of Templar ships disappeared from the port of La Rochelle without a trace. No records, no remains. Some say they sailed to Scotland, where the Templars had allies among the clans and within the unfinished walls of Rosslyn Chapel. Others say they arrived in Portugal, where the newly formed Order of Christ inherited their fleet and continued their explorations under the command of Prince Henry, the Navigator. Others claim they crossed the Atlantic. Maps discovered centuries later and nautical charts showing coasts unknown in Europe at that time contain cryptic symbols related to the Templars. Some believe they arrived in Nova Scotia, where the mystery of Oak Island revolves around a buried treasure, booby traps, and stones carved with medieval crosses. Too far-fetched to believe? Then explain this. Why has the Vatican been obsessed for centuries with controlling Templar narratives? Why are references to them in official church documents scarce and carefully selected? Why was the Shinon scroll hidden? Why are the Templar sites throughout Europe full of symbolism that coincides with esoteric Christian traditions and not orthodoxy? Because something has survived. Not only a rumor, not just a legend. A structure, a network, and maybe, just maybe, a truth that the church cannot confirm. Because if the Templars found something under the Temple Mount, be it the Ark, the Grail, or forbidden scriptures, then the church has two options. Recognize it and unravel centuries of doctrine, or bury it instead. What option does the Vatican usually choose? Ask Galileo. Ask Giordano Bruno. Ask the guardians of secret archives. Some believe that in the depths of those 84 kilometers of shelves, the Templar documents are still there, cataloged, translated, archived but not published, not revealed, and perhaps not even believed by their guardians. Because that is the final twist here. What if the Vatican itself does not fully understand what it hides? What if the secrets of the Templars have become too dangerous even to read? A kind of theological radiation better kept sealed. But the world keeps investigating it. Treasure hunters, symbologists, skeptics, and pilgrims. And every few decades, a new clue appears. A manuscript, a coin, a stone slab, that hints that the greatest treasure ever hidden was not gold or jewels. It was the revelation, a knowledge so transformative that it could restart civilization itself. And somewhere, in the shadows of the dome of St. Peter, someone is still protecting it. Perhaps it is not a knight, but someone in robes who watches, waits, and makes sure that the world never finds the door. But what happens when the symbols themselves begin speaking? When the architecture of the Vatican begins to whisper truths too dangerous for parchment? The enigma of the vicarious file, inscription DI. It sounds like a riddle from the Da Vinci Code, a phrase in Latin, a number, a centuries-old controversy wrapped in papal robes and dark numerology. But this is not fiction, though. It is theology, politics, symbolism, and fear intertwined in a single relentless mystery. Vicarious file day of the Son of God. The phrase has long haunted the halls of conspiracy and apologetic. At first glance, it seems quite innocent indeed. It is a title, a reflection of papal authority, a statement of representation that the Pope, as successor to St. Peter, takes the place of Christ on earth. But then the numbers come in, because in Roman numerals, each letter has a value. And when the numbers are extracted from vicarious file day, they are assigned their traditional Roman value and added up. The result is 666, the number of the beast. Apocalypse 13:18, King James Version. Let him who has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 63, 2 20s, and 6. That single verse gave rise to thousands of books, websites, late-night radio specials, and theological wars. Because if 666 is the mark of the beast, the signature of the Antichrist vicarious filii is a papal title, then what is the Pope? And what does the Vatican know? Let's proceed step by step. First, the phrase itself, of course. Vicarious means substitute or representative. Filii means of the Son, though. Dei means of God. Together, they represent the Son of God. Historically, the term has been used in ecclesiastical writings, although not universally or officially as a formal title of the Pope. It appears in documents, discussions on canon law, and apologetic writings. In particular, it was used in the donation of Constantine, a forged imperial decree that granted the Pope temporal power over Rome and the Western world. A document that is universally recognized as false today. We already have a suspicious start here. The numerical calculation works like so. Vrovnitko 5 I rovnitko 1 s rovnitko 100 a rovnitko 0 rovnitko 0 I rovnitko 1 u vrovnitko 5 s rovnitko 0 varius rovnitko 112 f rovnitko 0 I rovnitko 1 L rovnitko 50 I rovnitko 1 I rovnitko 1. FYI equals 53. D égale 5 cents. E uguale 0. I equals 1. V disadas e uvtesurikoin v sisatauxi. The total is 112 plus 53 plus 501 is equal to 666. Now, if this was just numerology, it could be discarded. But it is not about a lottery number. It is the number of the apocalypse, the apocalyptic code, the numerical DNA of God's adversary. Therefore, when the critics of the Church, especially during the Protestant Reformation, discovered this calculation, they did not whisper it. They shouted it. Martin Lutero, Juan Calvino, the authors of the Confession to Westminster. Many believed that the papacy was not simply corrupt, but the very anti-Christian system, and pointed to vicarious filii Dei as proof. The Catholic Church, naturally, denied this interpretation. The phrase, they argued, was never a papal title. It is not inscribed on a papal tiara. It is not used in official documents. Its presence in some historical writings does not constitute doctrinal meaning. But here is where things become complicated. There are persistent reports, though hard to verify, that the oldest papal tiaras, used during coronation rituals before the 20th century, bore the phrase, "There are no reliable photographs." Access to the Vatican crown collection is very restricted. The Vatican claims that it no longer uses the tiara, especially after Pope Paul VI reforms in the 1960s. Modern popes have replaced it with a simpler mitre. But the symbolism remains. The title of Vicar of Christ continues to be used, and the Latin phrase, though not official, reflects the same idea, which raises a real question. Why is this important? It is not about superstition. It is about authority, because the entire structure of the Catholic Church is based on a single transcendental affirmation, that the Pope speaks on behalf of God, that he has the keys to heaven, and that his office is sanctioned by God. If that claim is false, it is worse. If it is a blasphemous inversion, then the Church is not only imperfect, but deceived. And that is where the 666 theory gains strength, because it is not about letters or numbers. It is about power disguised as holiness. And that fear that the institution claiming to represent Christ is actually aligned with the adversary is not new. In the Middle Ages, rival factions within the Church accused popes of being false shepherds. Antipopes were proclaimed. Crusades were launched. The line between the divine and demonic has always been very thin. Then there is the apocalyptic angle. The apocalypse does not speak only of the beast. It speaks of a great religious power sitting on many waters, dressed in purple and scarlet, drunk on the blood of saints. And in the center of that vision, a woman sitting on a beast, a city with 7 hills, Rome. The parallels are disturbing. So disturbing that many modern Catholic apologists have tried to disarm the Vicaria Filii Dei theory by various methods. Deny the official use of that title. Question the mathematical calculations of Roman numerals. Point out that many names add up to 666. They are all valid arguments. And yet, none answers why the Church has never allowed full access to all papal insignia, particularly the oldest tiaras and mitres. Why the phrase appears in centuries-old ecclesiastical literature, but is now denied. Why does the Vatican refuse to recognize the symbolic danger of the title, even if it has never used it? And why a church obsessed with symbolism seems so uneasy with this one. Because if you have ever walked through St. Peter's Basilica, you know that the Vatican is a monument to precision. Each symbol, each sculpture, each phrase chiseled in Latin marble has a purpose. They are not the fruit of chance. Therefore, if the number 666 can be derived from a title used by the Pope, whether historically or colloquially, it means something, even if only psychologically, because numbers carry weight. The same Vatican that built its calendar around celestial events surely understands biblical numerology. And what if Vicarious Filii Dei is not an official title? And what if it's worse? And what if it is true? And what if, by a cosmic irony, the Church chose a phrase that fulfilled an ancient prophecy not because it wanted to, but because it could not escape it? And what if the papacy itself is trapped in a loop? A prophetic trap, a riddle in Latin. And the answer is 666. Of course, most Catholics will never hear of this. It is not in catechism classes. It is not in the Vatican press releases. It is not in the gift shop. It lives in footnotes, margins, shadows, but it is there waiting, and perhaps the original documentation is buried somewhere in the Vatican Archives. A letter, a decree, a papal order, something that explains why this phrase was used in the first place and why it was subsequently hidden. But the Vatican says nothing, and the beast does not need to roar. Sometimes, all it needs is a number. The catacombs of St. Sixtus and others. Entering the catacombs is going back to an era in which Christianity did not wear crowns, did not claim thrones, and crouched under the earth like prey. On the surface, the Roman Empire buzzed with markets, palaces, gladiators, and bronze gods. But below, in the earthen veins of the underworld, a different kingdom grew, one without swords, without marble, without light. It is here, buried under the streets of Roma, where the Church first laid its bones. And nowhere is that more palpable than in the catacombs of St. Sixtus. About 100 years before Constantine legalized Christianity, before the popes became princes and the basilicas pierced the horizon, there were the catacombs, labyrinths of tunnels full of tombs excavated in the soft volcanic rock. They were not just burial chambers. They were shelters, secret places of worship, cryptic archives of beliefs, pain, and resistance. The catacombs of St. Sixtus, named after the future pope and martyr Sixtus I, extended for kilometers under the Appian Way. Here 16 popes were buried next to dozens of martyrs and thousands of anonymous believers. The architecture is brutal in its simplicity: narrow corridors, vaulted niches, stacked coffins. The only decoration are some faint frescoes, scratched prayers, and symbols carved in the stone: fish, anchors, doves, bread. And yet, despite centuries of excavations and studies, the catacombs remain a profound mystery. Because not all the corridors have been mapped, not all the chambers have been opened, and not everything that has been found has been shared. Let's start with the scope. Scholars estimate that the catacombs of Sixtus alone house more than 500,000 tombs. The walls are full of niches, some no bigger than a suitcase. There are baby burials, often marked only with a name and a date, others sealed with marble slabs engraved in Latin or Greek. Some entire families lie together, stacked across generations, sealed in silence. But here's the problem. Many of these tombs have never been opened. The reasons are varied. Some are too fragile, others too remote. It is believed that entire sections have been lost after collapses, collapsed tunnels, or brick walls deliberately built centuries ago to block the entrance. What is hidden behind those walls? Nobody knows. Or, more provocatively, someone knows and does not say so because the Vatican controls access to the catacombs. Even now, in the 21st century, the Pontifical Commission of Sacred Archaeology decides who excavates, who studies, and, more importantly, what gets published. Access is denied for independent researchers. Unfiltered reports remain scarce. Photographic evidence of anomalies is very scarce. And there are anomalies. Over the years, rumors have emerged, both from people with inside information and from visitors, about unusual burials, non-Christian symbols, and cryptic inscriptions. Some mention sarcophagi without crosses, but featuring astrological engravings. Others describe frescoes that show scenes not found in the Bible: a woman resurrecting a dead man, a man holding a scroll with stars, a serpent crowned as king. It is said that one of these chambers, supposedly sealed at the end of the 19th century, represented a faceless crucified figure surrounded by animals and winged figures that do not correspond to any known Christian iconography. The report, published once in a marginal archaeological journal, was dismissed by church officials. According to them, the chamber was inaccessible and unsafe. Then there is the problem of the missing bodies. This is not about thefts of relics or grave robbers. There are entire sections of the catacombs that show clearly labeled tombs, but without remains, as if the bodies had been moved or are never there. Why would the church need false tombs? Unless what was really buried there should never be found, or perhaps was never human. Because some believe that the catacombs hide something more than martyrs and bishops. Some believe they were used to hide things: sacred texts, forbidden scrolls, artifacts too heretical or powerful to be destroyed. During the reign of Emperor Diocletian, Christian writings were burned throughout the empire. But many texts, gospels, apocalypses, and letters survived underground, literally hidden in clay jars, sealed in tombs, buried next to saints and sinners. What if some of these writings were never unearthed? What if the catacombs still contain early versions of the New Testament or totally unknown scriptures? What if those texts contradict the canonical Gospels? Would the Vatican announce its discovery, or would it discreetly rebury the evidence? The Church has precedents. The Dead Sea Scrolls, found in Qumran in 1947, took decades to be published fully. Scholars from the Vatican participated in it. Some scrolls, especially those containing messianic prophecies that challenged orthodoxy, were delayed, withheld, or dismissed as irrelevant. And that was a finding outside the control of the Vatican. Now, imagine what they found in their own backyard. But perhaps the most disturbing mystery of the catacombs is not what is buried there. It is what was built, because the layout of the catacombs is not random. It is mathematical. Some sections align with astronomical coordinates. The tunnels converge into pentagonal patterns. Certain chambers resonate only at specific frequencies designed for chants or rituals. At least one corridor, according to a suppressed report, points directly toward the rising sun on the winter solstice. Coincidence or intentional design? Were the first Christians codifying cosmological knowledge in their cemeteries? And if so, who taught them? Because Christianity, as we know it, arose from Jewish apocalypticism and Greco-Roman philosophy. But the oldest art in the catacombs is more like the iconography of mystery religions. Mithras, the killing of the bull; Orpheus, charming animals; shepherd gods. What if the catacombs were not only hiding from the empire? What if they were hiding from the church that came after? What if they kept older traditions alive? More dangerous traditions. Traditions that the Vatican would end up needing to bury not only physically, but also theologically. What if those traditions never died? There are modern, strange, dispersed, and difficult to verify reports of rites that are still being exercised in the deepest catacombs. Not by tourists, nor by priests, nor by orders, nor by groups with names like Los Custodi or La Orden Hueca. People say they descend from the first Christian mystics, Gnostics, or guardians of relics too powerful to show. Their existence is denied, of course, and half the catacombs are too. And the Vatican has few incentives to confirm or deny it, because these tunnels are more than sites. They are a spiritual minefield, an erroneous discovery, a sarcophagus, a parchment, a fresco too heretical to explain it in the church could lead it to defend not its doctrines, but its entire historical foundation. Therefore, silence, limited visits, guides with carefully prepared scripts, dim lighting, prohibition of wandering, and behind the velvet ropes, the true secrets. Bones covered in dust, sealed niches, symbols that do not belong there. And perhaps, somewhere in the deepest darkness, a locked chamber. One that has no name. One that has not been opened in centuries. One whose content would change everything. We may never know what is inside, but the fact that it remains sealed is answer enough, because in the catacombs, the dead are not the only ones kept silent. Next, we ascend from the crypt to the cosmos, from funerary tunnels to astronomical towers, because the Vatican not only looks down, it also looks up, and what it sees in the stars could explain why it is kept so silent about what has already landed. The third secret of Fatima. In the summer of 1917, the sun danced, or so thousands claimed. It was October 13th, a field outside the town of Fatima, in Portugal. A crowd of more than 70,000 peasants, journalists, skeptics, and believers were in the mud, soaked by rain. All eyes turned to the sky. Then it happened. The clouds parted. The rain stopped. The sun began to spin. It was beating, changing color, and zigzagging across the sky. Some saw it fall. Others fell to their knees. Cries of repentance were heard. Testimonies, photographs, and even secular newspapers recorded something inexplicable. But that was only the end. The real mystery had begun months before. 3 children, Lucia dos Santos, 10 years old, and her cousins Francisco and Justina Mardo, 9 and 7 years old. Between May and October of that year, they claimed to have seen and spoken to a luminous figure, a woman brighter than the sun on a small oak tree. She identified herself only as Our Lady and brought 3 messages, warnings, and secrets. The 3 secrets of Fatima have since become a theological minefield, a gold mine for conspiracy theorists, and, above all, a public relations nightmare for the Vatican. The first 2 secrets were dramatic. Yes, but the third is terrifying. And the Vatican has never told us the whole truth. Let's rewind. The first secret, a vision of hell. The children described a sea of fire, demons, and tortured souls. An old-school apocalyptic scene, with fire and brimstone. Creepy, yes, but doctrinally safe. The second secret, a prophecy. It predicted the end of World War I, the rise of communist Russia, and a second, more devastating war unless humanity repented. It also included an order: consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Maria or risk suffering divine punishment. This was revealed in 1941, years after the visions, but at the height of the First World War. It was opportune, convenient, and useful. But the third secret remained kept in a sealed envelope, written by hand by Lucia, and sent to the Vatican in 1957 with strict instructions. It should be revealed by 1960 at the latest. Why 1960? Lucia affirmed that the world would better understand its meaning by then. Something, she said, would make the secret clearer and more relevant. But 1960 arrived and passed, and the Vatican said nothing. No publication, no declaration, only silence. Why? Because according to multiple witnesses, including cardinals and Vatican officials, the secret was too explosive, dark, and dangerous. The theories multiplied. Some said that it predicted nuclear war. Others, the apostasy of the Church itself. Some affirmed that it foreshadowed the assassination of a pope decades before John Paul II was shot in St. Peter's Square in 1981. The suspense only grew. People demanded answers. In 2000, the Vatican finally published what it claimed was the complete third secret. In this version, the children saw an angel with a flaming sword about to set the world ablaze. Maria intervenes. The scene changes to a bishop dressed in white who is assassinated by soldiers on a hill outside of a ruined city. Other clerics are assassinated. The images are dark, yes, but vaguely symbolic. The Vatican affirmed that the bishop in white was Pope John Paul II, and that the secret was a prophecy of the 1981 assassination attempt. Case closed, or that is what they hoped. But many were not convinced. Reportedly, Lucia had said that the third secret would become evident by 1960. However, the assassination attempt did not occur until 2 decades later. The language of the secret revealed by the Vatican lacked key elements others had reported. Were the references to apostasy, hell, judgment, and false shepherds? Cardinal Chiappi, who read the secret under Pope John Paul II, would have said, "In the third secret it is predicted, among other things, that the great apostasy in the Church will begin at the top." That phrase does not appear in the published version. Archbishop Loris Capovilla, private secretary of Pope John XXII, hinted that there were 2 symbolic texts and 1 narrative. The narrative version, he said, contained the true threat. And that threat, according to leaks and declarations of high officials of the clergy, implied the possibility that the Church itself would turn against its flock, that the false doctrine, the corruption, and the spiritual confusion would not come from outside, but from inside the Vatican. This is the part that scared them, because a vision of war is manageable. A vision of hell is orthodox, but a vision of the Church collapsing from within is radioactive. And that is why many believe that the true third secret remains hidden. Some say that it was never revealed. Others think that it was substituted by a diluted version. And a few believe that it is buried in the secret vaults of the Vatican, so that only a future pope will open it when the final events begin to unfold. Lucia died in 2005, but before passing away, it is said, she affirmed that the final secret would be revealed when we saw the Church in flames from within. And what is it that we are seeing now? Scandals, division, confusion, rumors that the doctrine is changing, that truths that were once eternal are now open to interpretation, that the shepherds no longer know the way. If that is not a prophecy, what is? But the question remains, why does the Vatican not admit it? Why not publish the complete text? Because admitting that the Church is its greatest threat or declaring that the sky warned of internal collapse is breaking the illusion of infallibility. It is admitting that one cannot always trust in power, even when it wears robes. It is recognizing that prophecy has power and that the throne of Pedro can also tremble. That is why they keep it hidden under lock and key in a drawer, in a vault, or in memory. But the truth has a strange gravity. It attracts. It seeps. And in some deep place of the Vaticano, the true words of that secret remain in silence, without being read, or, what is worse, read and understood too well. Next, we move from prophecy to possession, from heavenly warnings to something darker. Because the Vaticano not only fears what may happen, it fears what is already inside. And that is why it continues practicing one of the most ancient and terrifying rites of all Christianity, exorcism. The vision of the Vaticano about exorcism and demonic possession. Despite all its golden art and theological debates, the Vaticano continues clinging tooth and nail to an ancient belief. The devil is real, not in a metaphorical sense, not in an allegorical sense. He is real, a conscious and intelligent evil, and he is not limited to whispering from the shadows. According to the Catholic Church, he enters people and speaks through them. He makes his way into the material world through possession. And when he does, the Church responds with one of its most secret and primitive rituals, exorcism. It is not only a cliché of horror movies. It is a sanctioned and documented practice. There is a manual, a ritual script, an order of operations. There are prayers and holy water. Yes, but also interviews, observations, evaluations. In some cases, teams of priests, sometimes doctors, sometimes even lawyers. And the Vaticano not only authorizes exorcisms, it trains exorcists. It keeps records and rarely speaks of it. Let's start with the basics. The Roman ritual of exorcism. The Roman ritual codified in 1614. It describes how to identify demonic possession, how to distinguish it from mental illness, and how to expel the invading spirit. According to the Church, the symptoms include speaking unknown languages, showing superhuman strength, aversion to sacred objects, knowledge of hidden or distant things, blasphemy, and obscenity, especially during religious acts. It is not about metaphor. It is a literal protocol and has not been relegated to history. In fact, it has been updated. In 1999, after centuries of silence, the Vaticano revised the rite. The new version included an updated theology, a more cautious approach, and an emphasis on differentiating possession from psychological disorders. But the ritual remained because the Church continues believing that possession exists. In fact, reports of possession and requests for exorcism have increased in recent decades. Only in Italia, there are hundreds of trained exorcists. The Vaticano even celebrates an annual conference about exorcisms to which clergymen from all over the world attend. It is not about something marginal, but about the habitual protocol of the Vaticano. So, where's the mystery? It is not that the Church believes in demons, but what it does not say. Because, despite all the official procedure, the Vaticano rarely speaks publicly of specific cases. And when it does so very carefully. But behind the scenes, there are stories. Stories that have never reached the sermons nor the press releases. Stories whispered by priests, hidden in reports, buried within archives. Let's talk about Father Gabriele Amorth, chief exorcist of Rome for decades and founder of the International Association of Exorcists. According to his own calculations, he performed over 70,000 exorcisms. Not all were complete possessions, but all were treated as spiritual attacks. Amorth was not foolish. He distinguished between the psychological and paranormal. He was known for his frankness and his stories. He spoke of victims who levitated, who spat nails, of bodies contorted into impossible shapes. He claimed that the devil had infiltrated the Vatican itself, and he implied more than once the most serious cases were never made public. That some required several exorcists, some involved the hierarchy. There are rumors that certain possessed people showed knowledge of Vatican secrets, things they had no way of knowing, codes, protocols, hidden sins. A supposedly silenced case involved a young seminarian in Rome who began speaking fluently in Latin, Aramaic, and ancient Greek. He named bishops he had never met. He recited parts of the Vatican's secret archives verbatim. The exorcism lasted for weeks. No final report was ever made public. Amorth once said, "Satan is pure spirit. He can speak any language, but what's scary is what he knows." Because for the Church, exorcism isn't just healing. It is to contain. What if a possessed person tells truths that the Church does not want heard? What if a demon speaks with the voice of someone the Church cannot acknowledge publicly? What if some possessions are not intrusions, but revelations? Think about it. The Church believes possession is based on permission, that the victim or someone in their lineage opened a door through sin, occult practices, or heresy. But what if the doors are bigger? What if there are sacred and broken places in the world where evil sneaks in more easily? What if the Vatican itself is built upon one of them? Many exorcists, including Amorth, claimed Rome was a spiritual battlefield, that under the marble and the prayers in Latin there were currents of evil, ancient, nameless, waiting, and the Vatican knows. That is why it keeps exorcists in its service. That is why it trains new ones every year. That is why it never reveals all the details of important cases. Because sometimes the possessed do not only shout obscenities. They give warnings. They speak of wars to come, of structures collapsing, of fire in the sky, of betrayal among the robes. A possessed woman in 1988 in northern Italy supposedly shouted during an exorcism in perfect ecclesiastical Latin, "The fisherman's net is broken. The flock will scatter. The city of 7 hills will drink the blood of its own lambs." She had never studied Latin, never heard of the city of 7 hills, an ancient name for Rome. Her case was declared closed, but her words remain. So does the footage. It is said to be locked away in the audiovisual archive of the Vatican, a vault containing films, audios, and photographs of rare and sometimes hidden events, papal coronations, secret conclaves, and exorcisms, because the Church documents them but does not share them. And the reason may be theological, but also existential. Because if the public knew everything that has been seen, heard, and fought in these rituals, the image of the Church as a bastion of serenity and stability could shatter. And what is worse, faith itself could change. Because believing in the devil is one thing, but believing that he is active, present, and sometimes victorious is another. That is more difficult. That suggests a universe much less orderly than the Vatican likes to preach. It suggests that evil does not wait outside gates. It walks the halls. And when he speaks through human mouths in rooms dimly lit by flickering candles and watched by trembling priests, he does not whisper. He roars. So the Church contains him, controls him, silences him, and keeps the rest of us looking away. Secret tunnels to Castel Gandolfo. The popes are not prisoners. That is what they always say. They are the administrators of the smallest country in the world, with the largest vaults, the most armor glass, and the highest spiritual authority on earth. But behind those public proclamations of freedom and holiness hides something that even the most devout do not often talk about. The escape plan, a hidden artery, a rumor that dates back centuries, a passage that is spoken of in whispers and footnotes and in papal logistical meetings late at night. The secret tunnel to Castel Gandolfo. It is not just a paranoid fantasy or an urban legend of Rome. It is a common thread interwoven into the tradition of the Vaticano. The idea that somewhere beneath the Apostolic Palace or behind the Swiss Guards, hides a tunnel several kilometers long that connects the Ciudad del Vaticano with the papal summer residence, located in the hills outside Roma. Castel Gandolfo, the papal refuge, the safe place. Historically, the place where popes go to rest or disappear and, according to some, to survive. Let's put into context. Castel Gandolfo is located about 25 kilometers southeast of the Ciudad del Vaticano, overlooking Lake Albano. The estate itself is an extensive complex of gardens, villas, and orchards. For centuries, it was a highly guarded and private papal residence, built on land that once belonged to the Roman Emperor Domitian. The popes used it to escape the summer heat, political pressures, and, in times of war, bombs. During World War II, it became a refuge. It is said that the villa housed hundreds, if not thousands, of refugees. The extraterritorial status of the Vaticano protected it from occupation. But how did they get there? Publicly. The popes used convoys, automobiles, and, later, helicopters. Now, there is even a heliport on the property. But from the beginning it has been rumored that the popes had another route, an underground one. This is where the mystery begins. First, the chronology. The first rumors about a tunnel between the Vaticano and Castel Gandolfo date to the 17th century. It was then that the papacy began expanding its properties at the villa. Construction records from that time refer to extensive underground fortifications. The language is vague, possibly on purpose. Vaults, foundations, warehouses. But the architects of the time spoke in euphemisms when referring to the papacy. Let's move to the 20th century. In 1929, the Latran Treaty established the Ciudad del Vaticano as an independent sovereign state. Along with that recognition, extraterritorial rights were reaffirmed over several properties outside the walls of the Ciudad del Vaticano, including the Villa of Castel Gandolfo. These rights meant that the estate was technically Vatican territory despite being kilometers from Roma. It also meant that the Vaticano could build or excavate without informing the Italian government. Think about it. A sovereign state with the right to build secret infrastructure under Italian soil and without being accountable to anyone but itself. Now think about this. The Vaticano has tunnels. It is not a theory. There is the Borgo Pact, a medieval elevated passage that connects the Vaticano with the Castillo Sant'Angelo, the Russian Five. It was used by Pope Clement III to escape the sack of Roma in 1527. That passage is visible, passable, and well documented. If the Vatican had an escape route in the 16th century, why would it not build another in the 20th century, especially during a time of world war, fascist regimes, nuclear threat, and growing unrest within the church? This is what the theorist claims. Some experts claim that at some point between the 30s and 50s, under the pretext of expanding infrastructures and restoring the villas, the Vatican began constructing a system of underground tunnels protected from aerial reconnaissance and radiation. A railway or hidden, fortified road connected the Vatican City with Castel Gandolfo under layers of earth, stone, and state secret. Too far-fetched. Think about it. The Vatican has its own train station. Yes, right inside its walls, near the Vatican Gardens, is a small but functional railway terminal. Today is mainly used for ceremonies or the limited transport of goods, but it connects to the Italian railway network. Where does that railway line lead? A branch heads south toward Castel Gandolfo. Now, the official explanation is that the railroad was built to transport ceremonial guests and goods. Pope I XCI once took the train for a pastoral visit. But let's assume there is another route, one that does not appear on maps, one that leads underground. For decades, rumors have emerged about such a route from various sources. Construction workers, estate caretakers, and even former Swiss guards. In an anonymous interview conducted in 1989 with a Vatican maintenance technician, it was stated that there was an emergency tunnel equipped with an electric car system, air filtration units, and reinforced exits. None of this is confirmed. No one has shown any plans. But of course, no one is authorized to do so. The Vatican is not just a religious institution. It is an intelligence operation. It has its own diplomatic corps, its own security services, its own archivists and censors. The kind of people trained to keep secrets. And if the existence of a tunnel system is part of an emergency protocol, something intended only for times of war or the evacuation of the Pope, it would be kept in the strictest secrecy, which could explain why it has never been publicly acknowledged. But the Vatican is no stranger to secrets. And this particular secret is not just about fleeing. It's about continuity. Because what if the tunnel isn't just for the Pope? What if it is an escape route for the Church itself? A way to move people, documents, objects, sacred relics? What if it is the backbone of a contingency plan? Let's imagine a scenario. War breaks out. Rome is besieged. The Vatican City is no longer safe. Within hours, the Pope disappears. Not through the main door, nor by air, but underground. Through a tunnel buried under centuries of earth, lined with reinforced concrete and adorned with nothing more than a sacred silence. He emerges 16 miles away in Castel Gandolfo. From there, he transmits a message, continues the Mass, and maintains the line. The Church does not fall, it moves. Intact, eternal, and invisible. That is the power of a tunnel like this. But here comes the part that really arouses suspicion. Castel Gandolfo closed in 2016. After centuries of use as a papal refuge, Pope Francis decided not to spend the summers there. He opened it to the public as a museum. But the estate is still guarded, still maintained, still partially restricted. And if the tunnel exists, the infrastructure remains. Waiting, sleeping. Then what is it for? Why keep it functional? Why keep it secret? One answer, because it is too useful to dismantle. And another, because the myth itself is power. The idea that the Pope can disappear and reappear kilometers away is security. It is psychological dissuasion. And maybe that is the truth. Because the Vaticano, with all its candles and crucifixes, is a fortress. And fortresses need escape routes. The pagan roots under the Basilica of San Pedro. A sacred empire is not built without first burying something. It is not a metaphor. It is an architectural truth. You have to excavate the foundations. You have to break ground. And in Roma, an eternal city with multiple layers and soaked in blood, anything sacred means disturbing the bones of the profane. Which brings us to the most sacred structure of Catholicism. The Basilica of San Pedro, a monument to the glory of God, to the apostolic succession, to the idea that a man, Pedro, the rock, died here, was buried here, and now, 2,000 years later, rules from under the marble and gold. But if you dig a little more, literally, the story becomes murkier, because under the basilica, under the Christian necropolis, under the mosaics and the relics, there's something older, something pagan. And the Vaticano does not like to talk about it. Let's start with the ground. The hill of the Vaticano, like the 7 hills of ancient Roma, was originally a cemetery, an area outside the city walls, on the other side of the Tiber. The kind of place that the Romans used for tombs, sanctuaries, and cults that did not quite fit into the civic order. It was not a glamorous place. It was where the dead were sent and where ancestors were worshipped. Before Pedro, before Jesus, before monotheism was imposed. Because the truth is that the hill was sacred long before Christianity's arrival. The oldest structure that archaeologists have confirmed on the hill of the Vaticano was a Roman necropolis with mausoleums, family tombs, and elaborate pagan altars. They were not quiet cemeteries. They were active spaces full of symbolic carvings, sacrificial offerings, and inscriptions to gods like Mitra, Cybele, and even Saturno. And this is where things get uncomfortable, because when Emperor Constantino converted to Christianity and began to build the first basilica around the year 324, he did not choose the place randomly. He chose it because it was already sacred. According to the legend, Pedro was crucified in the nearby circus of Neron and buried hastily. His followers marked the tomb, but there is no contemporary Roman record to confirm it. There are no inscriptions, no civil documentation, only oral tradition. What Constantino did have was an opportunity, an already existing sacred place, cemetery, a place already imbued with spiritual energy. If it was not Christian, it was something older. So he built. The ancient necropolis was partially buried and partially reused. The mausoleums were razed. The sanctuaries were desecrated. The stones of the pagan tombs were likely recycled to build the basilica's foundations. It was a common practice in the empire. Christianity did not destroy paganism. It absorbed it, and that absorption still haunts the roots of the basilica. Let's talk about Mitra. The Mithraic mysteries were among the most popular cults of Rome in the first centuries of our era. Centered around the god Mitra, a solar figure born from rock, slayer of a cosmic bull, and celebrated in secret underground temples, the religion had surprising thematic similarities with Christianity. A divine mediator, a sacred meal, a motif of death and rebirth. The Mithraeums, as their temples were called, were usually built underground, near cemeteries or within reused tombs. And guess what? Fragments of a Mithraeum have been discovered near the Vatican necropolis. Coincidence or continuity? Because if Constantine built his church on a Mithraic site, he was not only reclaiming land, he was usurping a rival religion, placing the sign of the cross on a place already charged with spiritual expectations. It is the definitive image change, and the Church has preserved that image very carefully. Let's fast forward to the Renaissance, when the current basilica was built atop Constantine's original. During the excavations, dozens of pagan tombs were rediscovered. Some were left in place. Others were carefully removed, archived, and reburied. When the Vatican finally began formal archaeological excavations in the 1940s, after pressure from historians, the clergy, and the rise of scientific curiosity, what they found was too significant to ignore. Yes, there was a tomb. Yes, there were bones. Bones that were later attributed to Peter himself. But the most fascinating discoveries were not Christian at all. They were pagan epitaphs, altars to philosophers, not saints, paintings of Orpheus, not Christ, prayers inscribed to gods with forgotten names. A particularly controversial finding was a mosaic in which the sun god, Sol Invictus, the invincible sun, appeared. Its rays extend outward in geometric splendor, surrounded by stars. The images bear an unsettling resemblance to the later Christian iconography of Christ Pantocrator. Was it a coincidence or inheritance? Because Christianity did not emerge from nothing. It inherited the architecture, symbols, and spatial sensibility of the paganism it intended to replace. It is not heresy. It is history. The first Christians took the temples and renamed them. They took the statues and recontextualized them. They took the Saturnalia festivals, the solstice, the dies, the natalies, and baptized them as saints' days and liturgical calendar. And so, buried under San Pedro, there is more than a simple tomb. It is a palimpsest, a spiritual parchment overwritten again and again, each layer visible if scraped deep enough. The Vatican allows limited visits to the necropolis, but only for certain tours and to specific tombs. The visit ends where the Church wants. You cannot wander or ask why a marble sarcophagus has a figure holding 2 torches and a snake instead of cross. You cannot ask questions about why a tomb has carvings of Helios, Selene, and the Zodiac. Speculation is not allowed because the official narrative must remain. This is the Church of Peter. This is a sacred place, and anything found below that contradicts or complicates that truth is misinterpreted, misplaced, or buried deeper. But the stones remember, and so do the symbols. Just as Christian basilicas often reflect the dimensions of ancient Roman basilicas, not by chance, but deliberately, San Pedro reflects the ancient logic of sacred geography. Build where the veil is thin, where the gods were once invoked, where offerings were made. And even now, some believe that the energy remains, that the pagan foundations of the Vatican hills still beat under the altar, that the ground is not simply sanctified, but saturated. Some have speculated that this spiritual heritage is what empowers the place. Not only the bones of Peter, not only the tradition, but the echo of older gods whose names have been forgotten, but whose presence endures. And if that is true, if the basilica is a Christian cathedral built on a source of pagan power, then perhaps the Vatican knows it. Maybe that's why it keeps the archives. Why? It restricts access. Why do some tombs remain unexcavated? Not for theology, but out of fear. Fear that a different history hides under Christian history. More ancient, more primitive, still resonating under the marble. Next, we move from the tombs to the texts, from the ancient ruins to the ancient knowledge. Because the Vatican not only buries the past, sometimes it hides it within books. The Vatican's implication in the lost ancient texts. There are books that make history, and books that remain buried by it. Some are forgotten by time, lost to putrefaction, war, and silence. Others, it is said, were lost on purpose, buried not by chance but by design. And if the rumors are true, if only half of the theories that are whispered have foundation, then the Vaticano is not only the guardian of the canonical texts, it is also guardian of the forbidden shelf. Let's be clear, the Vatican houses the world's largest ecclesiastical library. It's not just rows of ancient Bibles. It is a labyrinth of documents, epistles, codices, apocrypha, commentaries, transcriptions, and artifacts collected over 1,600 years. Officially, the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana contains approximately 11 million printed books, 75,000 codices, and over 8,000 incunabula printed before 1501. And that's just what they tell you, because next to the library, something else exists. The Archivo Apostolico Vaticano, formerly known as Archivo Secreto Vaticano, is a fortified fortress of parchments, tomes, and manuscripts not open to the public and not freely consulted. Access is only granted to accredited academics. Requests must be precise. You can't browse, you have to request it. Entry is allowed only under strict surveillance, with strict limitations and strict consequences. And even so, only a small part is accessible. What is an arrest? That is the question. Because somewhere in those 53 meters of shelves, locked behind coded doors and guarded by rules older than most countries, it is said that there are texts that could change everything. Let's talk about the Apocrypha. These are ancient religious texts excluded from the official Bible, not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. Some spoke of alternative versions of the life of Jesus as a child, as a mystic, as a man more human than divine. Others told stories of Lilith, of the travels of Enoch to heaven, of the Gospels of Maria, Magdalena, Thomas, and Judas. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, presents Jesus not as a sacrificial lamb, but as a teacher of secret wisdom, without crucifixion, without resurrection, only hidden knowledge, Gnostic, and dangerously democratic. The Gospel of Judas is even worse. It paints Judas not as a traitor, but as the chosen disciple, the one who understood Jesus' true plan. Texts like these did not disappear by accident. They were eliminated, debated in councils, prohibited by decree, and burned in public squares. But not all were destroyed. Some were hidden. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, revealed a world of Jewish mysticism and messianic prophecies that made early Christian history look like a footnote. Discovered in Egypto in 1945, this collection of 13 leather-bound papyrus codices contained texts that echoed the forbidden tones of the Gnostics. They spoke of secret knowledge, of a divine spark in every human being, of a creator God who was imperfect. The Vatican condemned these writings. But did they bury them, too? Because if similar scrolls were previously found during the Crusades in Rome, in Alexandria, where did they go? If a scroll was discovered during the sack of Constantinople in 1204, where did it end up? If Jesuit explorers brought ancient manuscripts from Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, were they studied or sealed? This is where the mystery gets complicated, because the Church has had centuries of opportunities to collect unofficial, heretical, and pre-Christian texts. And the Vatican's archive is precisely the place where those texts would disappear. We know that they keep secrets. In the 16th century, when Giordano Bruno proposed the idea of an infinite universe full of other suns and planets, he was branded as a heretic and burned at the stake. His writings were confiscated and his notes archived. When Galileo was tried for suggesting that the Earth orbited the Sun, his documents were confiscated and suppressed, and his letters archived. These are only the known cases. How many others exist in silence? There are persistent rumors shared by rebel historians, rebel monks, and even a whistleblower cardinal that the Vatican archive contains an uncensored and complete copy of the Book of Enoch, the lost books of civil prophecies that, it is said, predicted the arrival of Christ and were banned after the fall of the Roman Empire. A complete Gospel of Mary with passages detailing the teachings of Jesus about reincarnation and the soul's journey after death. Ancient texts describing pre-Adamite civilizations, being similar to humans before Eden. Atlantean parchment, supposedly discovered in some Egyptian ruins, describing a disappeared world order with references to divine royalty and celestial origins. All of it hidden, not because it is false, but because it is dangerous. After all, knowledge is power, and the Church has always been dedicated to preserving power. In the 9th century, The Vatican falsified the document of the donation of Constantine, used to justify the Pope's authority over Western Europe. It took almost 600 years for it to be proven false. If the Church falsified power, wouldn't it also suppress the truth? Now, some claim that the archive is not just a warehouse, but an armored repository of history. Knowledge that could question the resurrection, the virginity of Mary, the very divinity of Christ. And in the modern era, as digitization infiltrates every corner of knowledge, the Vatican remains selective. Only a small part of the archive is digitized. Only carefully selected documents are translated. And even so, much remains restricted, especially everything before the 13th century and everything that contradicts the official version. The official reason is fragility and conservation. The real reason is that some truths are not safe. Some truths dismantle systems. And some truths, once read, cannot be forgotten. What if there's a papyrus that says that Jesus was married? What if there is a tablet that predates Genesis by millennia and tells a different story? What if there is a scroll that claims that the crucifixion was symbolic, or that heaven and hell are mental states, not destinations? What would happen then to faith? What would happen to doctrine? What would happen to control? This is the dilemma of the Vatican. To fully open the archive is to risk the narrative. Leaving it closed is to confirm the suspicion. So it remains a gray area, physically cataloged but unknown. A paradox in marble and dust, and perhaps the most powerful library in the history of humanity. Because in those pages could be not only the history of what was, but also what should be forgotten. The independent time zone of the Vatican. Time is a tool. A calendar is a weapon. And clocks are where faith meets control. In a world governed by hours, minutes, and seconds, it is easy to forget that time itself was once sacred. It was the domain of priests, astronomers, and emperors. And for almost 2,000 years, no institution has kept time more zealously than the Vatican. But there is a detail that most people overlook. A small footnote in world horology, a wrinkle in the otherwise standardized tapestry of time zones. The fact that the Vatican City, a sovereign enclave of 44 hectares, operates on its own schedule, unofficial, obscure, yet meticulously observed. And like all the mysteries of the Vatican, it is not just about minutes. It is a story of power, ritual, and how far a spiritual empire will go to stay out of modern history. Let's begin with the facts. Officially, the Vatican City synchronizes its clocks with Central European Time, CET, the same as Rome. This makes sense from a geographical, political, and logistical point of view, but not officially at the heart of its ceremonial rhythm. The Vatican operates on a slightly different schedule, a liturgical time, a papal time, and sometimes a completely independent time. What does this mean? It means that the Vatican, although it follows the same time zone for diplomacy and coordination, has its own internal system of measuring time based not on solar precision or atomic clocks, but on ritual cycles, ancient bells, and the decisions of the reigning pope. It literally means that time in the Vatican can be bent. Let's consider the bell of the angels. Every day at noon, the pope recites the Angelus prayer, except on some occasions. Sometimes he speaks at 11:56. Sometimes at 12:04. Sometimes the bells ring before or after the scheduled time. It is not a mistake. It is intentional because in the Vatican, time adapts to the Pope, not the other way around. He is the successor of Peter, the vicar of Christ. When he speaks, the clocks stop, the schedules change, and the world waits. There is a theological layer here that goes back to the very foundations of Christian time measurement, because the Church did not just adopt the calendar, but created it. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar, reforming the previous Julian system to correct a 10-day lag in the date of Easter. That decision was not just about leap years. It was about authority. The Pope rewrote time with a single decree. Some countries refused to adopt it for centuries. Great Britain did not change until 1752. But the message was clear. Rome marks the clock, and that control never really ended. Today, within the Vatican City, time is not only measured but imposed. The Swiss guards change positions following schedules that adhere to ceremonial cycles. The liturgical offices observe a sacred daily rhythm that predates modern time zones by centuries. Lauds at dawn, vespers at sunset, compline at dusk. At the Vatican Observatory, astronomers calculate celestial movements not only for scientific reasons, but also to determine holidays, sacred times, and lunar events. It is said that even the Pope's private masses follow a papal time determined not by convenience, but by intuition. There are even unconfirmed rumors, of course, that in the depths of the Apostolic Palace, in one of the papal apartments, there is a clock that is 10 minutes fast. Why? Because popes are never late. They simply arrive when time dictates they should. This control of time seeps into politics. Let's consider how the Vatican manages Holy Week. Easter, the most important celebration of Christianity, is not determined by a fixed date, but by a complex equation that takes into account the spring equinox and the full moon for calculation. It is so ancient and arcane that it requires mathematical and astronomical knowledge. And who confirms that date? Not Google nor atomic clocks, but the Vatican. They do not limit themselves to observing time. They legislate it. So what does it mean that they have an independent time zone? It means that no one else in the world operates like them. Vatican time is not about seconds or punctuality. It relates to sovereignty. Just as the Vatican prints its own stamps, mints its own euro coins, and flies its own flag, it also controls its own clock, although in appearance it seems synchronized with the rest of Europe. Because beneath that surface hides something deeper, time as theology. And this is nowhere more visible than the Vatican's architecture. Clocks are all over Vatican City, but rarely show the same time. If you look towards St. Peter's Square, you will see two enormous clocks flanking the basilica. One shows the current time in Rome. The other, a ceremonial clock, is used only during papal appearances and liturgical events. Sometimes they match, sometimes they don't. Because in the Vatican, not all clocks are equal. It's not just a practical matter. It is symbolic. The Church exists beyond time. It moves at its own pace. It has survived empires, revolutions, and digital transitions because it never fully entered the modern era's precision obsession. In the Vatican, time is circular, not linear. The days repeat, writing a cycle. The liturgical calendar goes through seasons of penance, celebration, mourning, and resurrection. And even death does not stop time. It restarts it. When a pope dies, time stops literally. The fisherman's ring is broken. The Swiss guards withdraw. The clocks are adjusted for the seed vacant period between pontificates. A new era begins with white smoke. It is not called inauguration. It is called installation, as if restarting a system. So what is the point? Why does the Vatican cling to this strange autonomy over time? Because time is the first illusion of power. And the Vatican's entire structure is based on symbols, perceptions, and ritual dominance. If you can bend time to your will, then you can bend everything. And even more, by creating its sacred time, the Church separates itself from mundane chaos. Governments fall, empires change, but the Angelus bell rings on. And even if it rings at 12:03 instead of 12 o'clock, that too is sacred. Next, we will take a step from the intangible mechanism of time to the physical dimensions of the inexplicable. Because sometimes the truth looms. And on a strange day in 2007, something did something bright, something orange. And for a few unforgettable minutes, the Vatican looked directly into the unknown. The inexplicable sighting of an orange, disc-shaped UFO, 2007. It hovered, silent, bright, watching. An orange disc in the low sky over the most guarded square worldwide. A flash of surreal color against St. Peter's Basilica's austere dome. Without warning, explanation, just a pulse of light and a city left breathless. The year was 2007. The place, Vatican City. And for a brief, unrepeatable instant, the heavens opened, not with angels or visions, but a UFO. This didn't happen in Roswell or the Nevada desert. It was in Catholicism's epicenter, the spiritual and political heart of over 1 billion believers. A place fortified not only by walls, but centuries of rituals, secrecy, and surveillance. And it was overflown by a flying object that no one could officially identify. What makes this more than a footnote in some conspiratorial blog is who witnessed it. It was not a drunk tourist or a lonely concierge on the night shift. Multiple witnesses, including members of the press, affirmed seeing the disk. Several described it in disturbingly similar terms. A luminous orange sphere that moved slowly, silently, and then disappeared in an instant. And the Vaticano did not say anything. Not a comment, not a denial, not even a press conference, only silence, which in the strange logic of the Holy See says everything. Because when it is about unexplainable phenomena, the Vaticano never denies. It studies, registers, and when necessary, buries. Let's step back now. To understand why this incident matters, it is necessary to understand the relationship of the Vaticano with the stars. They have an observatory, two, in fact, one near Roma and another one in Arizona, managed with American astronomers. This is nothing new. The Vaticano Observatory is among the oldest astronomical research institutions worldwide. Founded in the late 16th century, it was a response to accusations that the Church was anti-science. The message was clear: we do not fear the stars, we study them. But behind that apparent scientific openness hides a darker curiosity. Because the Vaticano is not only interested in what is out there, but also in what arrives here. The sightings of UFOs are not usually a reason for concern for the Vaticano. But when one hovers over your city-state, brilliant, silent, and unexplainable, you pay close attention. And what makes the 2007 sighting so strange is not just the object. It is the moment when it happened. That year, the Vaticano was embroiled in controversy. Financial scandals, revelations of sexual abuse, internal divisions. It was a time of great instability. And suddenly, a disk appears in the sky. A coincidence or a warning? Some believe that the Vaticano knows much more than it admits. And if that is so, it would not be the first time. There are persistent rumors among the observers of the Vaticano, the ufologists, and even former clerics that the Church maintains a classified archive about extraterrestrial phenomena since at least the decade of 1940. According to some accounts, Pope Pio XII was informed of the Roswell incident, not by the military, but by Jesuit astronomers stationed in Estados Unidos and South America. In these versions of history, the Vaticano was not merely a passive observer of the UFO phenomena. It was a silent participant instead. Why ask? Because if contact with non-human intelligence were confirmed, it would suppose a theological crisis of unimaginable proportions. Or would it? Because here's a twist. The Vaticano has been preparing for it. In 2009, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, then director of the Vaticano Observatory, made news when affirming that belief in extraterrestrial life is not incompatible with Catholic doctrine. His exact words were, "The possible existence of extraterrestrial life does not contradict our faith, because we cannot put limits on the creative freedom of Dios." Read that again. The Church does not deny the existence of extraterrestrials, but rather welcomes them, which raises a disturbing possibility. What if that 2007 sighting was not just an anomaly? What if it was part of a continuous pattern? What if the Vaticano, hidden behind its archives, its silence, and its calculated public declarations, had been slowly and cautiously preparing the faithful for the truth? It is not that we are alone, but that we have never been. There are only rumors. Rumors of a secret papal encyclical, never published, drafted under the pontificate of Pope Juan Pablo II, a document that exposes the theological implications of extraterrestrial contact. Some say that it was too radical then. Others say that it has been kept under lock and key for just the opportune moment. Because that is how faith is. It is fragile. And the Vatican, more than any other institution on earth, understands how easy it is for revelation to become a rupture. Let's go back to the disk. What was it? No official photos were published. No flight records were offered. No radar data was shared. And yet it happened. Witnesses described it as an object that floated at a low altitude, slowly rotating and emitting a soft hum that was more felt than heard. One witness, an Italian journalist covering a press event at the Vatican, described it as a mechanical eye without a body. Another, a priest, said, "It seemed like something that was watching us, that was waiting. It didn't move like a drone. It was too smooth, too deliberate." Others suggested that it was not an object, but a projection, a kind of psychological test, a manifestation of something spiritual or technological, or both. The lack of response from the Vatican only increased the mystery. There was no press conference, no denial, no police report, simply nothing. And in that void, the story grew. It was not the first sighting, nor would it be the last. There have been other less credible and less widespread testimonies of luminous figures near the Vatican gardens, of brief power outages, and of silent changes in security protocols. But without documentation, they're only speculations. And that is exactly what the Vatican likes. Because ambiguity is control. They don't need to lie. They only need to leave the questions unanswered because, after all, the Church is based on mystery, and mystery, when managed correctly, is stronger than certainty. So what was that orange disc? A test? A visitor? A technical failure in the sky? We may never know. But one thing is certain. It left a mark, not in the headlines, nor in the photos, but in the eyes of those who saw it and in the silence of the institution that says it represents the divine. Because even in the heart of faith, there are observers. Next, we descend once more from the sky to the stone, from the visitors in the air to the enigmas under our feet. Because in the Vatican, there are still places that have not been touched by the cameras, by the sunlight, or by the passage of time. And in those places, there are catacombs, kilometers of them, the obelisks that are disappearing. The Vatican is not dedicated to illusions, or so it says. It is dedicated to stone, relics, canon law, and the unwavering authority of tradition. But hidden in the geometry of its most sacred square, literally in the shadow of the Basilica of San Pedro, there's a visual enigma, one that has baffled tourists, architects, and skeptical spectators for centuries. It is not written in a book or carved in Latin. It is disappearing in plain sight. The obelisks, specifically the one that rises above San Pedro Square. The tall and resistant Egyptian monolith that stands in the center of the square, located with mathematical precision and surrounded by concentric rings of stone framed by the arms of the Bernini colonnade. It is not a copy. It is not symbolic. It is a real and authentic Egyptian obelisk, transported across continents, erected by emperors, and appropriated by popes. And somehow, when viewed from certain angles, it disappears. Not gradually, not as perspective trick, but completely. You are walking across the square. You turn around, and it has disappeared. There is no trace nor silhouette, only sky. It is as if stone was subtracted from reality. Some say that it is only an optical illusion, an ingenious trick of the architecture, the shadows, and the ancient engineering. Others say it is an effect deliberately designed to communicate something deep, something secret, to those who know where to stand. Because this is not the Vatican City's only obelisk. There are several of them, and the story of how they got there and why they were placed in that place is strange and deep. A story that goes back to pagan Egypt, imperial Rome, and the coded language of power. Let's begin with the central figure, the Vatican obelisk. It measures more than 25 meters in height and weighs about 326 tons. It was originally erected in Heliopolis, Egypt, around 2500 BC. BC, probably as a monument to the sun god Ra centuries later. It was brought to Rome by Emperor Caligula, who placed on the central axis of his circus and arena, used for chariot races and executions. According to tradition, this is where St. Peter was crucified, and the obelisk was a witness. That's right, exactly. The same monolith that now sanctifies the square stood over the death of the Church's first pope, a relic of paganism transformed to the heart of Christianity. Except it is not just a symbol. It is alive in an architectural sense. Because when Pope Sixtus V ordered the obelisk moved in 1586, it was not just an engineering feat, it was a ritual, indeed. 40 winches, 900 men, and 70 horses. Domenico Fontana supervised the entire operation, detailing the process in an illustrated manuscript. But that's not all he did, either. Fontana placed the obelisk in the exact center of the elliptical layout of the Bernini colonnade, based not only on aesthetics, but also on geometry, specifically sacred geometry. The colonnade forms an enormous ellipse, a shape loaded with symbolic resonance. The focal point of an ellipse is its heart. And what is in the center of the ellipse of San Pedro? Nothing at all. That's right, nothing. The obelisk is not in the exact center. There's a mark on the ground, a stone disc, that often goes unnoticed by tourists, where you can stand. And when you do, the 4 rows of colonnades line up perfectly into one. From that point, the columns become one wall. The perspective then collapses. And, in a strange twist, the obelisk disappears from the foreground of your peripheral vision. You're standing at the blind spot designed by history. Now, is this architectural genius alone? Yes, it is. But is it only that? This is where the theories then begin. Because obelisks are not only decorative. They are ancient, spiritual, political, cosmic antennas. In Egyptian culture, they represented a frozen ray of the sun, a link between earth and the divine. They were aligned with star systems, placed at points of power. And when Rome conquered Egypt, it didn't just steal the stones themselves. It stole their symbolism. He reused his magic again. The Vatican, which has long been committed to astral symbolism, it is enough to look at its reform of the calendar, the cycles of holidays, and the zodiac mosaics, decided to centralize a pagan obelisk in its most sacred space. Was it to affirm its dominion, a declaration of triumph over paganism? Or was it something more subtle, a continuation? Because the Vatican did not destroy the obelisks, it preserved and restored them, anchoring them in lines of symmetry and light. In fact, the obelisk in St. Peter's Square functions as a solar marker. At noon on the equinox, its shadow aligns with specific stones in the square, forming a celestial clock. This was not accidental. The square is a clock, a calendar, a map. But of what? Some suggest that it marks hypothetical energy lines that cross the earth, connecting sacred places. Others believe that the Vatican obelisk was placed in such a way that it interacts with the dome of St. Peter, forming a cosmic axis, a vertical channel between heaven and earth. And others whisper that it hides something underneath. A tomb, a relic, a sealed chamber from when the obelisk arrived. Because the transfer in 1586 was not only practical, but ritualized. Sixtus V ordered that an exorcism be performed on the obelisk while it was being raised. Think about it. The Pope not only blessed it, but exorcised it. He believed that the stone contained spiritual residues from its pagan past. What did he believe it contained? Energy, memory, a presence? Now let's go back to the disappearance trick. What if it's not just visual? What if the alignment, the point at which the obelisk disappears, is also the point at which its power is neutralized or amplified? Is it a door? A veil? Just an ingenious trick of Renaissance optics? Or a message? A silent sermon written not with words, but with absence? Because what is more powerful than what is seen? What disappears? Here is a pattern. The Vatican collects symbols. It does not erase them. It gives them a new use. The Egyptian cross becomes Christian. The solar disk becomes the Eucharist. The obelisk becomes the monument to the death of St. Peter. Even the layout of the Vatican City reflects the concentric hierarchical axis of ancient sacred cities. And within that pattern, the obelisk becomes something more than stone. It becomes a pivot, a point around which the entire narrative of the Vatican revolves. And when it disappears, so does certainty. So does the illusion of total control. Because in the end, the disappearing obelisk reminds us of a deeper truth. Even the oldest symbols can disappear from view. Even the truths that seem most permanent can flicker and fade, depending on where you are. The search for the Holy Grail. Everyone knows this story. Everyone. A cup, a carpenter, a Last Supper, blood, divinity, betrayal, and then an object lost in time, shrouded in legend, sought throughout the centuries by kings, crusaders, alchemists, madmen, Nazis, and at least one Indiana Jones. But while most chase shadows, one institution has never had a run. It has simply stood still and waited. The Vatican. Because if the Holy Grail exists, if it is more than a metaphor, more than a symbol of impossible purity, then there's only one place where it would truly be safe. Not in a cave, nor in a temple, but under Roma, in the vaults, in the archives, in the silence under the ground of the most powerful church on earth. Let's start not with the object, but with the idea. The Holy Grail is normally described as the cup used by Jesus during the Last Supper, which was later used to collect his blood during the crucifixion. That is the core of the Christian legend. But the mythology is older, stranger, and more tangled. In Arthurian romance, the Grail is not just a cup. It is a vision. Sometimes it is a stone, sometimes a plate, sometimes a chalice that shines, floats, or speaks. Its definition changes depending on who tells the story, but its meaning never does. It is the vessel of divine mystery, the bridge between the mortal and eternal. And for an institution built precisely on that idea, the Vaticano has always had more than a passing interest in the Grail. It does not announce it. It does not include it in museum visits. But behind closed doors, behind locked cabinets, the search for the Grail is not just a legend. It is a project, because the Holy Grail, if found, would not only be a relic. It would be proof. Proof of the Last Supper, proof of the crucifixion, proof of a tangible link between Christo and physical matter. And that terrifies people because relics mean power, and no relic has more potential power than this one. Now, the Vaticano already claims thousands of relics, bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, even a fragment of Maria's veil. But the Grail, not officially, but unofficially, that is another story. There are rumors, always rumors, that the Grail was found centuries ago, not by a knight, but by a monk, that it did not pass through the hands of the Templars, but through the ink-stained fingers of the Benedictines, the Franciscans, the Jesuits, that is now not found on a golden altar, but in a wooden box sealed with wax, buried in the depths of the archives of the Vaticano. Let's follow one of those clues. In the 12th century, stories began to circulate in Western Europe about a miraculous cup possessed by a secret Christian sect somewhere in the Middle East. The Crusaders returned whispering about an object that healed wounds, lit up in the dark, and sang in the presence of prayer. The Templars, those infamous night monks, became obsessed. They excavated under the Temple of Solomon. They searched in libraries of Antioquia, in parchments of Jerusalem, in tombs of Edessa. And when the Templars fell in a bloody purge sanctioned by the French king and blessed in silence by the papacy, some believe that they hid the Grail before their leaders were arrested. They hid in a place where no one would ever look. Or perhaps the Vaticano took it itself. It would not be the first time that the Church absorbed what it could not control. In the following centuries, the stories about the Grail multiplied. España claimed it. Scotia also. Francia offered the Grail of San Maximin. Valencia now claims that it is a cup of AGOT with medieval inscriptions and a documentary trail that goes back to the 4th century. But none of these claims are conclusive. None has the approval of the Vaticano. And that is revealing because the Vaticano does not validate relics lightly. It requires evidence, lineage, authority. So why not comment? Why not authenticate a candidate unless you already have the authentic one? There is an artifact mentioned in obscure catalogos of the Vaticano archived under Rita Secreti Vas Sacramentoi. There are no public images, no description, but it is always accompanied by a red seal. Restricted access. Purpose unknown. Some affirm that it refers to the Grail, a relic that has never been shown, of which has never been spoken, but that has been studied behind closed doors by theologians and scientists. Because the Grail is not only a spiritual object, it is a theological balm. Let's suppose that the Vatican possesses the authentic cup, dating to the 1st century, with traces of DNA that coincide with blood found in the Shroud of Edo or the Holy Shroud of Turin. What would happen then? The implications would be terrifying. It would elevate Catholicism to the indisputable height of Christian authority. It would provoke a war between confessions. It would drive millions of people to pilgrimage. It would crush others with disbelief. That is why the Vatican, if it really has the Grail, would never reveal it, unless the world's balance required it. In its place, it would hide it, it would keep it, and it would wait for the right moment. Because the Holy Grail is not only miracles or history, it is narrative. And no institution on earth understands narrative better than the Vatican. This is where things get stranger. In certain rare texts among medieval monks, coded dispatches from the Templars, there are references to a second Grail. It is not a cup, but a book. Some say that the Grail was never a recipient. It was a manual, a guide for divine resurrection, a codex on how Christ took advantage of the laws of reality to bend life and death. A document too dangerous for the world. What if that is what the Vatican found? Not an object, but a writing. One that makes the gospel seem like summaries. One that reveals not only the teachings of Jesus, but his method, secret, and power. What if that is why the Grail never appears? Because it was never meant to be found. Because it is still being translated page by page in the candlelit crypts under Roma. A heresy or the definitive truth? We do not know. But we do know this. The Church has never stopped searching for the Grail, even when it says that it does not believe in it, even when it dismisses it as legend. The Vatican Observatory was founded in part to track the stars used in the ancient maps of the Grail. The Jesuits were the first to excavate many of the sites related to the myth of the Grail. The papal missions have silently passed through all the regions. It is rumored to hide the chalice from Glastonbury to Ethiopia and the caves of Cappadocia. And the same silence always follows. Neither confirmation nor denial. Only a blink, a whisper, a file marked as vast sacramenti. So what is the Holy Grail? A cup, a relic, a concept, or a cornerstone? The missing piece in the Vatican's ever-growing mosaic of faith, control, and cosmic mystery.